Egyptian Mythology, an expanded journey from creation to eternal rest. Egyptian mythology unfolds like a timeless lullaby under the desert stars. For over 3 millennia along the Nile, tales of gods and creation, of death and rebirth were whispered in temple halls and inscribed on tomb walls. These myths have given us some of the most vivid and enduring images from the ancient world. Indeed, few people today have not heard of the cosmic scales weighing a human heart against a feather, or of a soul-devouring monster awaiting the unworthy dead. Such scenes, originating in Egyptian funerary texts, remain deeply ingrained in our collective memory. Yet the true stories behind them are even more profound and enchanting when told in full, with historical accuracy and reverence. In this narrative, we journey through the full arc of Egyptian mythology, from the first moment of creation emerging out of primordial darkness, through the reigns and struggles of gods on earth, and finally into the mysteries of the underworld where souls are judged in the Hall of Ma'at. Along the way, we will meet deities like Atum, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, Anubis, Thoth, and many others, witnessing how their deeds established the cosmic order cherished by the ancient Egyptians. Each episode will be grounded in the original sources, pyramid spells, coffin texts, temple inscriptions, and papyri, ensuring that our retelling stays faithful to the wisdom preserved by Egyptian priests and scribes. The tone of our journey is gentle and unhurried, befitting the calm flow of the Nile. As in a bedtime story told by an elder, each chapter ends softly, guiding the listener deeper into the mythic dreamland. We begin at the very beginning, in a time before time, when there was nothing but a boundless ocean of chaos called None. Part 1. Creation, from Chaos to Cosmos. The Ocean of None and the Ogdoad of Hermopolis. In the beginning there was only darkness and the endless primeval waters of None, a chaotic sea without light or life. This was not mere water as we know it, but a primordial substance, formless, infinite, and pregnant with all possibilities. Ancient Egyptians described it as both the source and the end of all things. Before creation, everything existed within None as potential. After the end of time, all would return to None's embracing waters. The concept was so fundamental that even in later periods, when temple walls were built, they were often designed with undulating patterns at their base to represent the waters of None lapping at the edges of the ordered world, a reminder that chaos always pressed at the boundaries of creation. Ancient Egyptians in different regions envisioned creation unfolding in unique ways from this primordial ocean. In the city of Hermopolis, Khmunu in Egyptian, modern El Ashmunain, priests taught that before anything else existed, there emerged 8 primordial beings known as the Ogdoad. These 4 divine couples, with frog-headed gods and serpent-headed goddesses, embodied the elemental potential of creation. None and Naunet, the hidden waters themselves, infinite and encompassing, Heh and Hauhet, formless infinity, the endless expanse of space and time that had no measure, Kek and Kauket, darkness absolute, the absence of light that filled all space, and Amun and Amenet, the unseen wind or hidden power, the invisible force that would move through creation. The choice of forms for these primordial deities was significant. Frogs were creatures that appeared, seemingly from nowhere, in the Nile mud after the inundation, symbols of spontaneous generation and fertility. Serpents were creatures of the earth and water, sinuous and mysterious, representing the fluid, undifferentiated nature of pre-creation. Together, these 8 deities represented not individual gods in the later sense, but rather the raw materials and conditions of the universe before it took shape, the building blocks of reality itself. Within this watery nothingness, the Ogdoad kept the balance until they gave rise to a small hill, the primordial Mound, emerging from the flood. The imagery here was drawn directly from Egyptian experience. Every year, as the Nile's inundation receded, the first land to appear was small mounds of fertile silt, rich with the promise of new life. The primordial mound was the cosmic version of this annual miracle, the first solid ground in an ocean of chaos, the foundation stone upon which all creation would rest. From that mound issued a miracle, a cosmic egg. In one tale preserved in temple inscriptions, a celestial goose called the Great Cackler, Gengenwer, laid this egg upon the mound. The goose was associated with the earth god Geb, whose honking laughter at the moment of creation was said to have broken the primordial silence. While another version holds that an ibis, the bird of Thoth, god of wisdom and magic, was responsible for the egg. Either way, the egg soon hatched, and the newborn deity inside was the first sun, bringing light to disperse the darkness. Some stories say a lotus blossom also bloomed on the primeval hill at that moment, and from its petals the infant sun god emerged as a shining child. The blue lotus, Nymphaea caerulea, was a powerful symbol in Egyptian thought. It closed its petals at night and sank beneath the water, only to rise again and open with the dawn. Thus, it became the perfect emblem of resurrection and renewal, the daily rebirth that mirrors the first moment of creation. Imagine the scene. From the dark waters of Nun, a mound of earth appears. Upon it, a single lotus bud rises. As the first dawn approaches, the petals slowly unfold, and from within emerges a radiant child god, bringing light to a world that had never known it. In certain traditions, a scarab beetle, Khepri, came forth from the lotus, transforming into a child who promptly let out a cry, and from the tears of this child god were born the first human beings. This beautiful detail reveals the Egyptian view of humanity's origin. We are born from the emotions of the divine, from the tears of joy, or perhaps loneliness, shed by the Creator at the moment of his emergence. The Egyptian word for tears, remit, was similar to the word for people, remit, and this linguistic connection reinforced the myth. Humanity was not an afterthought, but an integral part of the creation, emerging from the very first moments of the world's birth. Thus, out of chaos came the first dawn, a moment of joyous creation when sunlight first kissed the waters, allowing all other forms of life to begin. The Ogdoad, having fulfilled their role in bringing forth the sun, retired to the underworld, according to later theology, where they continued to support the daily rebirth of the sun from below. In Hermopolis, the Ogdoad were venerated as the ancestors of all gods, the primeval powers whose interaction set everything in motion. Atum and the Ennead of Heliopolis. In the great sun temple of Heliopolis, Inu in Egyptian, City of Pillars, located near modern Cairo, a different creation story was taught, centered on the solar creator Atum. Heliopolis was one of the oldest and most influential religious centers in Egypt, and its theology came to dominate much of Egyptian religious thought, especially regarding kingship and the afterlife. Before creation, Atum existed within the waters of Nun as a latent potential being. The name Atum means the complete one, or the all. He was the totality of existence compressed into a single point, waiting to unfold. He was also called he who came into being by himself, for unlike later gods who had parents and family, Atum was self-created, self-generating, the first cause that needed no prior cause. When the time came, and the texts do not explain what triggered this moment, for it was the beginning of time itself, Atum willed himself into existence, rising out of Nun atop a sacred mound called the Benben. This Benben was often envisioned as a shining pyramidion or obelisk-like pillar, marking the first land, a stone that caught the first rays of the primordial sun. In the innermost sanctuary of the temple stood a sacred Benben stone, said to be the actual primeval mount or a representation of it. Later, the pyramid form itself, especially the pointed capstone or pyramidion placed atop a pyramid, was understood as an architectural representation of the Benben, a way of making each pyramid a symbol of creation and a stairway to the sun. Alone in the void, Atum was both male and female, a self-created one containing all potentials within himself. This androgynous nature was necessary, for he had no partner with whom to reproduce, yet reproduction was essential to continue creation. Desiring companionship and further creation, Atum used his own body to produce offspring. According to the sacred texts, particularly the pyramid texts, the oldest religious texts in the world, dating to the Old Kingdom, he engendered new life by an act of self-expression, often described as spitting out or otherwise emitting his own essence. One version states that he took his phallus in his hand and through masturbation produced his children, a detail that might seem crude to modern ears, but which the Egyptians saw as a profound theological statement about self-sufficiency and the creative act. From Atum's spittle, or seed, were born the first divine pair, Shu, the god of air, and his twin sister Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. The pyramid texts preserve Atum's declaration, "I spat out Shu, I expectorated Tefnut." The names themselves suggest the sounds of spitting and breathing. Shu evokes the sound of exhalation, while Tefnut might suggest moisture or spittle. These two carried the creative force forward. Shu became the atmosphere and life-giving wind, the space in which life could exist, while Tefnut brought dew and rain, the moisture necessary for life in the arid Egyptian landscape. Shu and Tefnut were the first complementary pair, the first duality to emerge from the unity of Atum. They were often depicted as a lion and lioness, fierce protectors of the cosmic order. In turn, Shu and Tefnut gave birth to the next generation of elements. Their children were Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. Now the fundamental structure of the cosmos was taking shape. After the primeval waters and the first mound, there emerged air and moisture, followed by earth and sky. The universe was assembling itself layer by layer. At first, Geb, earth, and Nut, sky, were inseparable, locked in a tight embrace. Egyptian art often shows Geb reclining on his back, or on his side, propped on one elbow, with his body representing the surface of the earth, while Nut arches over him, her elongated body forming the dome of the sky, her hands and feet touching the four corners of the horizon. Her body is often painted blue and spangled with stars, for she is the night sky itself. The two lovers clung to each other passionately, leaving no space between them. But the universe needed space for life, so their father Shu, the heir, intervened. He stood between his children, pushing Nut up away from Geb and forming the dome of the sky high above the ground. One of the most iconic images in Egyptian art shows Shu standing upright, arms raised above his head, supporting the body of Nut as she stretches across the heavens, while Geb lies prone beneath. Sometimes Shu is aided by other deities. The Hegods, representing infinity, often appear as his assistants in holding up the sky. This separation was both necessary and sorrowful. Geb and Nut could no longer embrace, and Geb's weeping for his lost lover caused the plants and vegetation to grow, his tears becoming the waters that nourish the earth, while Nut's tears became the rain. Yet now there was space. The space in which air flowed, in which light shone, in which living beings could move and breathe. Now the air, earth, and sky were in their proper places, and life could flourish in the space between them. Before their separation, however, Geb and Nut had already conceived 4 or 5 children of their own, a new generation of gods who would play out the world's first dramas. These were Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Some accounts include a 5th sibling, the elder Horus, Horus the elder, Harowiris, born to Nut, though in other traditions, Horus the younger is the son of Isis and Osiris in the next generation. The birth of these children was itself dramatic. Ra, the sun god, a form or successor of Atum, had decreed that Nut could not give birth on any day of the year. Thoth, the clever god of wisdom, came to Nut's aid. He challenged the moon to a game of draughts, an ancient board game, and won from the moon 1/72nd of its light. With this stolen light, Thoth created 5 extra days, the epigomenal days, inserted at the end of the 360-day Egyptian year to make 365 days, which did not belong to Ra's decree. On these 5 days, Nut gave birth to her children, Osiris on the 1st day, Horus the elder on the 2nd, Set on the 3rd, bursting forth violently from his mother's side, Isis on the 4th, and Nephthys on the 5th. Thus, even the calendar year was tied to myth. Osiris and Isis, brother and sister, would later marry and become the beloved divine rulers of Egypt's mythic prehistory, while Set and Nephthys, also brother and sister who married each other, would play more ambivalent roles. Together, this family of 9 gods, Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys, constituted the Heliopolitan Ennead. Ennead meaning group of 9, the 9 deities through whom all aspects of the world, sky, earth, air, moisture, fertility, kingship, etc., came into being. It is interesting that this divine family also provided a sacred model for kingship. Just as Osiris was a king who died and was succeeded by his son Horus, so too did the Egyptians see each mortal pharaoh as the living Horus during his reign and as an Osiris after his death. The harmony of this family reflected the ideal harmony of the cosmos, a balance the Egyptians called Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and order established at creation and upheld by gods and righteous men alike. Ma'at was both a goddess, depicted as a woman with an ostrich feather on her head, and an abstract concept, the fundamental rightness of the universe. To act in accordance with Ma'at was to align oneself with creation. To act against it, Isfet, chaos or wrongdoing, was to threaten the very fabric of reality. Ptah and the creative word of Memphis. Yet another creation tale comes from the city of Memphis. Men-Nefer, enduring and beautiful, the ancient capital of unified Egypt, where the craftsman god Ptah was revered as the supreme creator. In the theology recorded on a granite slab known as the Shabaka stone, now in the British Museum, Ptah brings the world into existence not through bodily fluids or progeny, but through the power of thought and speech. This is perhaps the most philosophically sophisticated of all the creation accounts, anticipating much later ideas in theology and philosophy about the divine logos or creative word. All of creation was first conceived in the mind, heart, of Ptah, and then spoken aloud into being by his tongue. As this text explains, sight, hearing, breathing, they report to the heart, and it makes every understanding come forth. As for the tongue, it repeats what the heart has devised. The Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of thought and consciousness. The brain was considered relatively unimportant and was discarded during mummification. Thus, Ptah's heart conceived the idea of creation, and his tongue spoke it into reality. The text continues, thus, through Ptah's speech, all the gods were born, and his Ennead was completed. According to this Memphite theology, Ptah not only created the gods in this way, but also established all aspects of the world's order. It was Ptah who made the towns, he established the nomes, he placed the gods in their shrines, he made their bodies according to their wishes. Thus, the gods entered into their bodies of every wood, every stone, every clay, everything that grows upon him. Thus were gathered to him all the gods and their cause, content, united with the Lord of the two lands. In other words, Ptah's creative word organized the world and assigned each deity their place and form, whether as a statue of wood or stone or a living creature, uniting all the gods under his dominion. This remarkably abstract and philosophical cosmogony portrays Ptah as a divine intellect or master craftsman, designing the world as an artisan designs a work, first in the mind and then in material form. Ptah was depicted as a man wrapped in a tight-fitting garment like a mummy, holding a scepter that combined the symbols of life, Ankh, stability, Jed, and power, was. He was the patron of craftsmen, metalworkers, and architects, and was said to have designed the first temple and taught humans the arts of building and making. His high priest bore the title Greatest of the Controllers of Craftsmen, indicating the god's role as the divine architect. The Memphite story complements the others, where Atum and the Ogdoad emphasize spontaneous generation and biological creativity. Ptah emphasizes deliberate planning and creative speech. Despite their differences, these creation myths were not seen as contradictory by ancient Egyptians, but rather as multiple layers of understanding the same truth, that the world emerged from primeval chaos through divine agency. Many temples even incorporated more than one creation account side by side, acknowledging the local creator deity while honoring the universal aspects of creation. Egyptian theology was remarkably flexible and inclusive, capable of holding multiple truths simultaneously without seeing them as contradictions. Other creator deities and regional variations. In addition to Atum, Ptah, and the Ogdoad, other gods were also credited as creators in various locales and periods, each adding their own flavor to the grand tapestry of creation mythology. There was Khnum of Elephantine, Aswan region, a ram-headed god who molded living beings, and even human children, on a divine potter's wheel. Khnum was said to fashion the body of every child on his wheel before it was born, shaping it from Nile clay. Temple reliefs show Khnum at his potter's wheel, forming the body of a child, while another deity, often Heket, the frog goddess, holds the Ankh, life symbol, to the clay figure's nose. Royal ideology incorporated this. The king's body was specially crafted by Khnum, explaining the divine nature of the pharaoh. Khnum also had an important role in the annual inundation. He was said to live in a cavern in the First Cataract region, where he controlled the floodgates that released the Nile's waters each year. Thus, Khnum was a creator not just at the beginning of time, but continuously, fashioning each new life and ensuring the yearly renewal of Egypt through the flood. There was Min of Koptos, modern Kift, an ancient god of fertility depicted in ithyphallic form, symbolizing the procreative force of nature. Min was one of the oldest gods in the Egyptian pantheon, worshipped from the pre-dynastic period. His iconic pose, standing upright with one arm raised and an erect penis, made him the embodiment of sexual potency and agricultural fertility. Min was honored at harvest festivals, where the pharaoh would ceremonially cut the first sheaf of wheat to honor Min and ensure the fertility of the land. In creation myths from his cult centers, Min was sometimes identified as the primeval creator who generated all life through his procreative power, the vital force that drives reproduction and growth. And there was Amun of Thebes, modern Luxor, whose name means the hidden one. Originally, as part of the Ogdoad in Hermopolis, he was Amun, the unseen power of the air, paired with his female counterpart, Amunet. But as the city of Thebes grew in importance, especially during the Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom, when Theban pharaohs ruled Egypt, so did its god. The priests saw in Amun the perfect, unknowable, all-encompassing creator. He was the invisible wind that moved all things, the hidden soul of the cosmos. Unlike gods who could be depicted, and thus in some sense comprehended, Amun was mysterious and transcendent. His hiddenness was his essence. He could not be fully known or represented. Yet he was also immanent, present, everywhere, in every breath of wind. During the New Kingdom, especially under the powerful 18th dynasty, this hidden one was merged with the supreme, visible power of the sun god, Ra. He became Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, a supreme deity who was both unseen and ever-present, the ultimate source of all creation and the patron of the pharaohs. The great temples of Karnak and Luxor were dedicated to Amun-Ra, and he received the lion's share of Egypt's wealth and adoration. Hymns to Amun-Ra describe him in exalted terms: the sole one who made everything, the hidden of name, mysterious of form, the one who is in all things, the secret one whose appearances are unknown. In this syncretism of Amun and Ra, Egyptian theology reached perhaps its most sophisticated expression, a god who is simultaneously transcendent, hidden, unknowable, and immanent, present, powerful, both the source of creation and its sustaining force. And finally, there was the Aten, the sun disk itself, worshipped by the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, originally Amenhotep IV, who ruled circa 1353 to 1336 BCE, as the sole creator and god. In the famous Great Hymn to the Aten, possibly composed by Akhenaten himself, the sun disk is praised as the giver of all life, the creator of all lands and peoples. You create the earth according to your desire, while you are alone. People, cattle, all flocks, everything on earth that walks on legs, everything up high that flies with its wings. How many of the things you have made, though hidden from view? sole God without another beside you. This radical monotheism, or at least henotheism, was an anomaly in Egyptian history. After Akhenaten's death, traditional polytheistic worship was restored, and the Aten was relegated to being simply one form of the sun god among many. But for a brief period, the Aten represented an attempt to distill Egyptian solar theology into a single, universal creative principle. Each tale, whether of an Ogdoad, an Ennead, or a solitary craftsman god, begins in the hush of Nun's waters and ends with the ordered world we know, a lush Egypt lit by the sun, structured by Ma'at, and filled with life. The first sunrise and daily renewal. No matter the version, Egyptian creation stories all reach a similar climax, the moment the sun rises for the first time, marking the beginning of time itself. This event was called the Zep Tepi, literally the first occasion or the first time, and it was seen as the primordial act that set all subsequent time in motion. Before the first sunrise, there was no time, no change, no sequence of events. There was only the static, timeless potential of the Nun. But when light first broke across the waters and the sun climbed into being, time began to flow, and with it came the possibility of history, narrative, and existence as the Egyptians knew it. Egyptians believed this primordial sunrise was reenacted every day. Each morning's dawn was a miniature Zep Tepi, a recapitulation of creation itself. Every day, the world was remade, pulled back from the brink of chaos. This was not mere poetic metaphor, but a fundamental belief that shaped Egyptian architecture, art, and ritual. The sun's journey from east to west was a drama of cosmic significance, and human beings, especially the king and the priests, had a role to play in ensuring it continued. Temples were built as symbolic models of the universe's birth. The outer walls often undulated like the waves of Nun, a visual reminder that the temple stood as an island of order in the chaotic waters. The floor level gradually rose as one moved from the entrance toward the inner sanctum, mimicking the slope of the primeval mound emerging from the waters. Reliefs on the walls showed marsh plants at the base, representing the vegetation of the first mound, and stars on the ceiling, representing the sky of Nut. The sanctuary itself housed the god's image in darkness, analogous to the moment of creation in the shadowy womb of Nun. At dawn each day, when priests opened the sanctuary doors and the first light flooded the holy chamber, they believed they were recreating the emergence of light from darkness. In essence, the world was reborn with the rising sun. The morning temple ritual, performed daily in every major temple across Egypt, was a microcosm of creation. The high priest, acting on behalf of the pharaoh, would rise before dawn and purify himself by bathing in the sacred lake. As the sun began to rise, he would approach the sealed sanctuary, light a torch, and chant hymns welcoming the sun. Then he would break the clay seal on the sanctuary door, a seal that was renewed each night, pull back the bolt, and open the doors. The statue of the god inside, which had been in darkness all night, was now awakened by the light. The priest would say, "Awake in peace, wake in peace, your awakening is peaceful." He would then tend to the statue as one would tend to a living being, washing it, dressing it in fresh linen, anointing it with oils, adorning it with jewelry, and presenting offerings of food and drink. Incense would be burned, filling the sanctuary with fragrant smoke. All of this was done to honor the god and ensure the god's continued presence and favor. But more than that, it was a ritual reenactment of creation. The opening of the doors was the first sunrise. The awakening of the god was the emergence of the creator from the Nun. The offering of food and incense sustained Ma'at and ensured the cosmic order would hold for another day. When the ritual was complete, the priest would carefully close and seal the sanctuary again, and the god would rest until the next dawn. This pattern, repeated every day for thousands of years, was the heartbeat of Egyptian religion, a daily affirmation that the world endured, that chaos had been pushed back once more, that creation continued. And so, as creation was completed, the stage was set for the drama of divine life on earth. The sun god Ra now shone in the sky, and on the earth ruled Osiris and the gods of the Ennead. It was a golden age, but not without its conflicts. We now move from the mythical first time into the era when gods themselves walked upon the earth and the great struggles of the divine family unfolded. Part 2. The Myths of Gods on Earth. the reign of Ra and the rebellion of mankind. After creation, the sun god Ra, often identified with or as a successor to Atum, ruled as the first kin of gods and men, reigning from his palace on earth during a primordial golden age. In this era, gods and humans lived together, and Egypt knew perfect peace and prosperity. Ra, in his prime, was wise, powerful, and just, embodying Ma'at in his every decree. Yet even gods are subject to the passage of time. As the eons passed, Ra grew old. His bones became silver, his flesh turned to gold, and his hair became as lapis lazuli. But with age came frailty. He began to drool and shake, and some humans, observing his decline, began to whisper rebellion. They no longer feared the aged sun god and plotted to overthrow his rule. Their disrespect and schemes deeply wounded Ra, who had given them life itself. According to the Book of the Heavenly Cow, or the Destruction of Mankind, preserved in several royal tombs, Ra convened a secret council of the elder gods to decide what to do about humanity's insubordination. He summoned Nun, his forefather, along with Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut, asking for their advice. The gods counseled Ra to punish the rebels by sending his eye, a manifestation of his divine power, to destroy the wicked among mankind. Ra agreed. The Eye of Ra was a complex symbol in Egyptian mythology, representing the aggressive, protective aspect of the sun god's power. It could manifest as various goddesses, most commonly Hathor or Sekhmet. In this myth, Ra's eye took the form of Hathor, but as she descended to earth to carry out the punishment, she transformed into the bloodthirsty lioness Sekhmet. The name Sekhmet means the powerful one, and she certainly lived up to it. Sekhmet descended upon humanity like a whirlwind of claws and fangs. She began slaughtering humans by the thousands, wading through their blood, drinking it, and delighting in the carnage. The goddess became drunk on blood and slaughter, her fury unstoppable. She roamed across Egypt, leaving devastation in her wake, and it seemed she would not stop until every last human was dead. Ra, looking down from heaven, was suddenly horrified. He had only intended to punish the rebels, not to exterminate all of humanity. But Sekhmet, now mad with bloodlust, could not be reasoned with or stopped. Ra realized he needed to trick the goddess to save what remained of mankind. Working quickly, Ra commanded his servants to gather vast quantities of red ochre and mix it with 7,000 jars of beer. Some versions say the beer was brewed from barley at Heliopolis. The mixture was poured out on the fields where Sekhmet was expected to hunt the next morning, creating a vast pool of red liquid that looked exactly like blood. When Sekhmet awoke at dawn and saw the blood, she rushed forward eagerly, expecting to continue her feast. She bent down and began drinking deeply, but instead of blood, it was beer. The powerful brew quickly intoxicated the goddess. She drank more and more, becoming thoroughly drunk, and eventually collapsed in a stupor. When she awoke, her rage had dissipated, and she transformed back into the gentle, beautiful Hathor. Thus, humanity was saved, though their numbers had been greatly reduced. Ra, however, was disgusted with humanity's rebellion and tired of ruling on Earth. He decided to withdraw from the earthly realm. At his command, the sky goddess Nut transformed into a giant cow. This is why the text is called the Book of the Heavenly Cow. Ra climbed onto the cow's back, and she lifted him up high into the heavens, separating him from the earth. The distance between earth and sky, which Shu had created at the beginning, now became even greater as Ra ascended into the celestial realm. Nut's legs trembled under the weight of the sun god, so Shu and 8 head gods positioned themselves beneath her to provide support, holding up the sky cow and ensuring she would not collapse. From that day forward, Ra ruled from the sky, traveling across Nut's back, the dome of heaven, by day, and through her body, the Duat underworld, by night. He entrusted the rulership of Earth to other gods, beginning with Shu, then Geb, and eventually Osiris. The separation between the divine and mortal realms became more pronounced, though gods could still intervene in human affairs. This myth explained, for the Egyptians, why the gods no longer walked visibly among humans as they once did. The rebellion of mankind had caused a rupture, and now the gods resided primarily in heaven, in their statues, or in the unseen world, while humans occupied the earthly plane. The myth also established important religious practices. The near destruction of humanity by Sekhmet became the basis for festivals and rituals to appease the goddess. The Feast of Intoxication, or Festival of Drunkenness, was celebrated annually in honor of Hathor/Sekhmet, involving music, dancing, and copious consumption of beer. The festival commemorated Sekhmet's intoxication and transformation back into Hathor, symbolically reenacting the salvation of humanity. Red beer was ritually poured out, and participants drank until drunk, in a sacred reenactment that was both celebration and propitiation. The beer was sometimes described as the beer of the end of butchery, or the beer that brings Sekhmet to rest. The story of Ra and the secret name. Another myth concerning Ra's old age involved the clever goddess Isis. In this story, Isis desired to possess the power of Ra himself, and she knew that such power resided in Ra's secret name. Names held immense power in Egyptian magic. To know the true name of a being was to have control over them. Every deity had many names and epithets, but also a hidden, secret name that contained their essential being. Ra, in his old age, had grown careless. One day, as he walked on earth, he drooled, and his divine spittle fell upon the ground. Isis, who was watching, quickly gathered some of the spittle and mixed it with earth, fashioning a serpent. This serpent was no ordinary snake, but a magical creature, infused with the very substance of Ra. Isis placed the serpent on a path that Ra would travel. When Ra passed by with his entourage, the serpent bit him. Immediately, Ra cried out in pain, a pain unlike anything he had experienced before. The poison from the serpent, which was, in a sense, made from Ra's own essence, was burning through the sun god's divine body. He called to the other gods for help, but none could cure him. The poison was too powerful because it came from Ra himself. Isis approached Ra, feigning concern and offering to help. "Tell me your secret name, Great One," she said, "and I will use it to craft a spell to cure you." Ra, desperate and in agony, began listing his many names. "I am the maker of heaven and earth. I am the fashioner of the mountains. I am he who made the water. I am Khepri in the morning, Ra at noon, and Atum in the evening." But he did not speak his true secret name. Isis was not fooled. "You have not told me your real name," she said. "Without it, I cannot heal you." The poison continued to burn, and Ra's suffering grew unbearable. Finally, in his torment, Ra relented. He agreed to transfer his secret name to Isis, but only under the condition that she would then pass it to her son Horus, ensuring it remained within the divine family. Ra whispered his true name into Isis's ear. The text does not record this name, keeping it secret even from readers, and immediately Isis was able to craft a spell to cure the poison. Ra recovered, but Isis now possessed his magical power, a power she would later use to protect her son Horus and ensure his rightful place as king. This myth illustrates several Egyptian beliefs: the power of names and words in magic, the cleverness of Isis, who was regarded as the most skilled sorceress among the gods, and the theme of knowledge and power passing from one generation to the next. Ra, the elder, had to yield some of his power to the younger generation, represented by Isis and ultimately Horus, just as each generation must give way to the next. It also reinforced the idea that magic and knowledge, rather than brute force alone, were the keys to power, a very Egyptian concept. Osiris, Isis, and the betrayal of Set. With the sun god Ra having withdrawn to the heavens, rule of the world passed to Osiris, the first divine king to reign upon the earth. Osiris proved to be a wise and benevolent ruler, a culture hero who lifted humanity out of barbarism. It was said that Osiris taught the people of Egypt how to farm and grow grain, introduced them to the fruits of cultivation, including vines and the making of wine, gave them laws to live by, and instructed them in the proper worship of the gods. Before Osiris, according to myth, humans were primitive, living as cannibals without order or civilization. By these gifts, the once desolate land flourished. Osiris was depicted as a regal king with green or black skin, symbolizing fertility and rebirth, often wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, or the Atef crown, a version of the white crown with ostrich feathers on either side, and holding the crook and flail, symbols of kingship. His consort was his devoted sister wife, the goddess Isis, whose wisdom and skill in magic perfectly complemented Osiris's leadership. Together, they formed an ideal pair. Osiris was the good king who established order and taught civilization, while Isis was the wise queen whose magic protected and healed. Under their gentle reign, Egypt knew prosperity and peace. So beloved was Osiris that he later came to be called Wen-Nefer, the perfect or eternally good being, reflecting how deeply the Egyptians cherished his memory. Osiris's gives-gift agriculture was particularly significant. Grain, especially barley and emmer wheat, was the foundation of Egyptian civilization, the source of bread and beer that sustained the population. By teaching humans to plant, cultivate, and harvest grain, Osiris enabled settled life, cities, and culture. He became strongly associated with the agricultural cycle, the planting of seed, the growth of crops, the harvest, and the annual flooding of the Nile that made agriculture possible. In later theology, Osiris was seen as embodying the grain itself, dying when cut down at harvest, buried in the earth like a seed, and reborn when the new crops sprouted. However, not all in Osiris's family were content. Osiris's younger brother, Set, also spelled Seth, lord of storms and the desert, grew jealous of Osiris's power and popularity. Set was a complex figure in Egyptian mythology, neither wholly evil nor wholly good. He was associated with chaos, storms, violence, and the barren desert, but he also had positive aspects. He was strong, virile, and courageous. In some periods, Set was even honored as a protector deity, particularly in the eastern Delta region and during the Ramesside period, when some pharaohs took Set as their patron. But in the cycle of Osiris myths, Set plays the role of the jealous usurper, the force of disorder threatening the harmony established by Osiris. In his heart, Set schemed to usurp the kingship of Egypt for himself. His jealousy was perhaps understandable. Osiris, though younger, or at least less powerful by nature, had been given the rich, fertile land of Egypt to rule, while Set was lord only of the harsh, barren deserts beyond the Nile Valley. Set's domain was the Red Land, the desert, where nothing grew, the place of exile and danger, while Osiris ruled the Black Land, the fertile soil nourished by the Nile. Moreover, Osiris was beloved by gods and humans, while Set was feared and sometimes resented. These factors fed Set's resentment until it hardened into murderous intent. One day, Set put his treacherous plan into action. He secretly gathered a band of conspirators, 72 in number according to some accounts, perhaps representing the full scope of the conspiracy, and prepared a special trap for his brother. Set had commissioned a beautifully ornamented wooden chest, made to very precise interior dimensions. In fact, Set had surreptitiously obtained Osiris's exact height and build so that only one person in the world would fit perfectly inside this box. The chest was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, inlaid with precious materials, painted with gold, decorated with beautiful designs. It was a treasure fit for a king. Then Set organized a grand banquet to which Osiris and many others were invited. During the festivities, as wine flowed and entertainment delighted the guests, Set unveiled the splendid chest as if in jest, praising its craftsmanship. With feigned generosity, he announced that he would gift this fine chest to whomever could lie down in it and match it exactly in length. One after another, the guests tried to curl up inside the elaborately decorated casket, but all proved either too tall or too short, too broad or too thin. Some could barely fit their shoulders through the opening. Others rattled around inside with space to spare. Finally, Osiris himself, not suspecting any danger and amused by the novelty of the challenge, agreed to attempt it. He climbed into the chest and stretched out his full length, and indeed, he fit perfectly, as snugly as if the box had been made to measure, which, of course, it had. In that instant, Set's henchmen slammed the heavy lid closed. They hammered nails into it and sealed it tight with molten lead, trapping Osiris inside. Despite Osiris's struggle and cries, there was no escape from the sealed coffin. The conspirators swiftly carried the sealed coffin to the Nile and hurled it into the river, which carried it swiftly away on its current towards the sea. Thus did Set's dark plot succeed. Osiris was now as good as dead, entombed alive in a watery grave. The date of this betrayal was remembered as the 17th day of the month of Aether, around November, when the Nile's inundation had receded and the land began to wither, a fitting time for the death of a vegetation god. When the horrific news spread, a great cry of mourning among the gods and the people. It is said that even nature lamented. The sun dimmed, the Nile's waters turned red as with blood, and crops wilted on their stalks. This was the first murder, a cosmic crime that disrupted the harmony of the Golden Age. The quest of Isis. Isis was overcome with grief at the loss of her beloved husband, but she did not succumb to despair. Isis was above all a goddess of tenacity, healing, and magical skill. She resolved to find Osiris and restore him if possible. Cutting off a lock of her hair, a traditional sign of mourning in ancient Egypt, and donning a mourning dress of black linen, Isis embarked on a long journey, searching every marsh and riverbank for the chest that held Osiris. She wandered through Egypt, at her wits' end, as one text says, not resting, not eating, determined to recover what was lost. She questioned everyone she met, even little children playing by the riverside, whether they had seen a wooden coffin float by in the Nile waters. The innocence of children, the Egyptians believed, gave them a purity of vision that adults lacked. They might have noticed what others missed. But no one had seen the chest. Many days and nights passed with no trace of Osiris or the coffin. During her quest, Isis made a significant discovery. She learned that her sister, Nephthys, who was also Set's wife, had secretly borne Osiris a son. According to later legends, Nephthys had disguised herself as Isis to lie with Osiris and had become pregnant. This strange detail may have originated as an explanation for why Nephthys would side with Isis against her own husband Set in the trials to come. Fearing Set's wrath at her infidelity and at the existence of a son of Osiris, Nephthys abandoned the newborn in the marshes, hoping he would be found and protected by someone other than herself. Following a trail of clues, one story says she found a garland of flowers that Osiris had left with Nephthys, and guided by a pack of dogs who led her with their keen sense of smell, Isis found this child, a little boy with the face of a jackal. She named him Anubis and adopted him as her own, raising him with motherly love despite his unusual origin. Anubis would grow up to become the deity of embalming and funerary rites, a faithful guardian and servant of Isis and Osiris. His canine nature, jackal or wild dog, made him perfectly suited to his eventual role. Jackals were often seen in cemeteries at the desert's edge, and thus became associated with death and the protection of the dead. With the child Anubis now accompanying her, Isis continued her tireless search. At last, Isis learned through divine rumor and her own intuition that Osiris's coffin had drifted out of the Nile and across the Mediterranean Sea, coming ashore near the city of Byblos, modern Jabil in Lebanon. The Greek writer Plutarch, in his treatise on Isis and Osiris, provides the fullest version of this part of the story, though Egyptian sources also allude to Isis's journey to foreign lands. The coffin had lodged in the branches of a tamarisk tree, or in some versions, a cedar or acacia tree that grew on the coast. In a short time, this tree miraculously shot up into a mighty pillar with the coffin encased inside its trunk. The tree grew with such speed and size that it became famous throughout the region. The local king, admiring the great size and beauty of the tree, had it cut down and fashioned into a pillar for the roof of his palace, not realizing what secret it contained, what divine presence lay hidden in its wood. Guided by signs from the gods and her own magical insight, Isis traveled to Byblos and eventually discovered Osiris's fate. She sat down beside a well near the palace, weeping. In some versions, she disguised herself as an old woman. When the queen's handmaidens came to draw water, Isis ingratiated herself with them, braiding their hair and infusing it with a divine fragrance that emanated from her body, the scent of the gods, sweet as incense and flowers. The handmaidens returned to the palace smelling wonderful, and the queen inquired where they had found such perfume. They told her of the mysterious woman by the well. The queen sent for Isis and, charmed by her apparent skill and wisdom, hired her as a nurse for the queen's infant son. Isis cared for the child lovingly, but each night she performed a secret ritual. She would place the baby in a magical fire that would burn away his mortal parts and grant him immortality. At the same time, Isis would transform into a swallow and fly around the pillar that contained Osiris, singing a mournful song. One night, the queen followed Isis and witnessed this scene. Seeing her son in the flames, she screamed in terror and snatched the child from the fire, interrupting the magical process. Isis immediately revealed her true identity, resuming her divine form in a blaze of light. She explained that she had been granting the child eternal life, but now that the ritual was interrupted, the gift was incomplete. In some versions, the child died of shock. In others, he lived but remained mortal. The astonished king and queen, now aware they had been hosting a goddess, granted Isis whatever she desired. Isis asked only for the pillar that contained the coffin. When it was given, she carefully sawed it open and drew out Osiris's coffin from within. Upon embracing it and seeing Osiris's lifeless form, Isis let out such a keening wail of sorrow that one of the king's young sons fell down dead of fright. Some say this child, known as Maneros, became a symbol of lamentation in Egyptian lore, and his name was used in mourning songs. Isis took the remaining piece of the pillar, the wood that had surrounded the coffin, and wrapped it in linen, anointing it with oil. She gave it to the king and queen, saying it was holy. For centuries afterward, this piece of wood was preserved in a temple at Byblos and venerated as a sacred relic. Then, Isis returned to Egypt with Osiris's body, bringing it back home concealed in the reeds of the Nile Delta, to a hidden place where she could work her magic to restore him. The Dismemberment and First Mummification. Soon after her return, however, disaster struck again. Set himself happened upon Osiris's coffin during a nighttime hunting trip. It was the night of a full moon, and Set was out with his hounds hunting in the marshes. Set was patron of hunters and loved the chase, when he discovered the chest hidden among the papyrus reeds. Enraged that his brother's body had been recovered and that Isis had thwarted his plans, Set resolved to destroy Osiris utterly this time, in a way that would make restoration impossible. He tore open the coffin, seized Osiris's corpse, and ripped it into pieces. 14 parts, or in some versions 16, which he scattered up and down the length of Egypt from the delta to the southern frontier. In some versions, Set cast the dismembered pieces into the Nile to be eaten by fishes so that they could never be reassembled. This second crime was even more terrible than the first. Not only was Osiris killed, but his body was desecrated, scattered, and defiled. In Egyptian belief, the integrity of the body was essential for resurrection in the afterlife. Without a whole body properly preserved, the spirit would have no home and could not achieve eternal life. Set seemed to have ensured Osiris's permanent destruction. When Isis returned and learned of this second outrage, her mourning was said to be more bitter than ever, yet she did not give up. Her determination was absolute. With grim resolve, Isis and her sister Nephthys, who had now joined Isis's cause, turning against her husband Set, set out to gather the fragments of Osiris's body. They traveled the Nile Valley from one end to the other, searching for every limb and organ, combing through marshes, fields, and wastelands. Each time they found a piece of Osiris, Isis carefully wrapped it in linen and performed the proper funerary rites, preparing that fragment for eventual resurrection. Because of this, later legend held that many different places in Egypt claimed to have a tomb of Osiris, since Isis held a funerary ceremony for each part of the god in each location where she found one. These became sacred sites, pilgrimage destinations where people would go to honor Osiris. The most important of these sites was Abydos in Upper Egypt, which was believed to contain Osiris's head, or in some traditions, his entire reconstituted body, and became the most sacred cemetery in Egypt. Every pious Egyptian hoped to be buried at Abydos, or at least to make a pilgrimage there during life. And those who couldn't be buried there would erect a cenotes, a symbolic tomb at Abydos, so their spirit could be near Osiris. In the end, Isis succeeded in recovering all but one piece of Osiris. The only part she failed to retrieve was the god's phallus, which had been thrown into the Nile and swallowed by fish, particularly the oxyrhynchus fish, the Nile carp, and the phagris, fish which Egyptians thereafter considered taboo to eat in many regions, as they had consumed the god's member. Undeterred, Isis fashioned a substitute phallus for Osiris using her magic, molding it from clay or gold and attaching it to his reconstituted body. In this way, even though the original was lost, Osiris could be made whole again. Now, with the help of her adopted son Anubis, who had a special gift for working with the dead, perhaps a talent inherited from his parentage, Isis attempted a wondrous feat, the first mummification. Up to this time, death had been final. No corpse had ever been restored to life or prepared for eternity. This was not merely wrapping the body in linen. Anubis, in his wisdom, knew the body must be purified and preserved to last for eternity, to serve as a vessel for the Ka and a home for the Ba. He performed the first embalming, carefully removing the internal organs which would cause decay if left in the body. These precious organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, were themselves preserved, blessed, and placed into 4 special vessels, the canopic jars. Each jar was protected by one of the 4 divine sons of Horus, who would guard them forever. Imseti, human-headed, guarding the liver; Hapi, baboon-headed, guarding the lungs; Duamutef, jackal-headed, guarding the stomach; and Kabesen-Nuef, falcon-headed, guarding the intestines. These 4 sons also had a cosmic role, associated with the 4 cardinal directions and the 4 pillars of heaven. The heart, however, was left in the body, for Anubis knew it was the seat of the soul, the organ of thought and emotion, and would be needed for the final judgment in the afterlife. Only after this careful preservation, using natron salts, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate found in the Wadi Natron, to dry the flesh for 40 days, or 70 days in later practice, was Osiris's body anointed with sacred oils, myrrh, frankincense, cedar oil, and wrapped in the finest linen, his form made eternal, ready for Isis's magic. But Isis was the greatest magician among the gods, taught by Thoth himself and having stolen the secret name of Ra. Together with Anubis, they wrapped Osiris's body in fine linen bandages, layer upon layer, reciting protective spells with each layer. They purified it with incense and natron and uttered powerful spells over it, calling upon all the gods to witness and assist. Anubis, skilled with the embalmer's tools, worked to open Osiris's mouth and eyes using a ritual adze and other implements, so that his spirit might return to his body and he might breathe, eat, see, and speak again in the afterlife. This ceremony, called the opening of the mouth, would become one of the most important funerary rituals in Egyptian religion, performed on every mummy and even on statues of gods and kings. Through their loving care, Osiris became the first mummy, and by this divine embalming, he was given new life, not the life he had known before, but a different kind of existence. In a hushed night, under the light of the moon, Isis used her restorative enchantments and the beating of her wings, for she could transform into a kite, a small hawk, her sacred bird, to draw breath back into Osiris's form. She hovered over his body, fanning him with her wings to create the breath of life. Magical texts depict her reciting, "I am your sister Isis. You shall not rot, you shall not perish, you shall not be far from me. My mouth is thy nostrils, giving to thee my breath." She breathed life into him with her own breath, her magic compelling his Ka to return from wherever it had fled. Osiris lived again, not as a mortal among men, but as an immortal spirit in a resurrected body. His skin had turned green, or black in some depictions, the color of vegetation and rebirth, symbolizing that he was now a being of the other world, forever associated with the cycles of death and renewal. In that twilight state between life and death, Osiris and Isis were reunited. They shared a tender moment of intimacy, and through her magic and the artificial phallus she had created, Isis conceived a child with her beloved husband, becoming miraculously pregnant with Osiris's posthumous son. She took the form of a kite and hovered over Osiris's body, and through this sacred union, the seed of Horus was planted in her womb. Having fulfilled this final act of life and ensuring his lineage would continue, Osiris could no longer remain in the world of the living. His resurrection was but temporary, a prelude to a new existence. The land of the living was for those with mortal bodies. Osiris, now transformed, belonged elsewhere. Osiris gently told Isis that he must depart to a different realm where he had his own great destiny to fulfill. He could not return to rule Egypt as he once had, for he was no longer fully alive in the earthly sense. When Osiris passed from the earthly world, he descended into the unseen realm of the dead, the Duat. There, in the west, where the sun sets each evening, the west was always associated with death and the afterlife in Egyptian thought, as that was where the sun died each day. Osiris became the lord of the underworld, the king and judge of the deceased. He took his place on a throne in the hall of Ma'at to preside over the judgment of souls and offer the gift of rebirth to those found worthy. From that time onward, Osiris was revered as the god of death and resurrection, for he had himself died and been reborn, not as a living man, but as an eternal spirit king. The Egyptians believed that through Osiris, all could conquer death, for he opened the way that others might follow. His myth became the template for every Egyptian's hope. Just as Osiris died and was resurrected through the love of Isis and the skill of Anubis, so too could every deceased person hope to be resurrected in the afterlife, provided the proper rituals were performed and they lived a righteous life. Isis, for her part, went into hiding to bear and protect her infant son, the heir of Osiris. The stage was now set for the next great chapter in the divine drama, the coming of Horus and the battle to reclaim Egypt from Set's tyranny. Isis and Horus, the hidden child of Chemis. Isis gave birth to her son Horus in the papyrus swamps of the Nile Delta, in a secluded place called Chemis, or Chemis, possibly located on an island in the marshes. This child, Horus the Younger, or Horus saw Isis, Horus son of Isis, was the posthumous son of Osiris, the rightful heir to Osiris's kingship and the hope for restoration of Ma'at to Egypt. Knowing that Set, who had now usurped the throne, would seek to destroy any rival, Isis kept baby Horus hidden among the marshes for his safety. The divine mother and child lived in secret, sheltered by the thick reeds and protected by the marsh dwellers who were loyal to Isis. The papyrus swamps of the delta were a liminal space, neither fully land nor fully water, neither civilization nor wilderness, making them the perfect hiding place where Set's power was diminished and Isis's magic could flourish. The vegetation was so thick that even Set's keen eye could not penetrate it. Isis used all her wit and magic to protect Horus. She summoned snakes and scorpions as guardians, creatures of the marshland that would attack any intruder. She invoked the power of the sun and moon to hide their refuge, and she sang lullabies imbued with protective spells over the infant. At times, danger encroached. In later folktales and magical texts, it is said that Set sent scorpions to kill the child, or that Horus was bitten by a snake while Isis was away gathering food. One famous magical text, preserved on the Metternich stela and other healing stelae, tells how young Horus was stung by a scorpion and lay dying. Isis returned to find her child convulsing, foam at his mouth, his body cold. She cried out to the heavens for help, and her wail was so terrible that the sun boat of Ra stopped in its tracks. The god Thoth, ibis-headed lord of wisdom and magic, descended from Ra's boat and came to Isis's aid. Using his vast knowledge of spells, Thoth recited incantations over the child, commanding the poison to leave Horus's body. "Flow out, poison. I am Thoth, the son of Ra. The poison is destroyed." The magic worked, and Horus recovered. This text became a powerful healing spell, and stelae inscribed with it, showing Horus as a child standing on crocodiles and holding snakes, called Sippi or Horus on the crocodiles, were used throughout Egyptian history as protective amulets and healing tools. Water poured over the stela would absorb its magical power and could then be drunk by the sick to cure them. Thus, Horus grew up quietly in the wetlands, nursing at Isis's breast, hunting birds and fishing under the watchful eyes of marsh spirits. He learned the virtues of truth and honor from his wise mother, who told him stories of his father Osiris and the kingship that was his birthright. Though he was a divine falcon by nature, Horus means the distant one or the high one, referring to the falcon soaring in the sky. Isis did not let Horus rush into confrontation. She knew Set was powerful and violent, and that her son needed to grow strong and wise before challenging his uncle. She bided her time, raising Horus in secret, teaching him, training him, and preparing him for his eventual destiny. In Egyptian art, the young Horus, called Harpocrates by the Greeks, from Egyptian Harpokhered, Horus the child, was often depicted as a nude child with the sidelock of youth, a hairstyle worn by Egyptian children, sitting on his mother's lap or holding a finger to his lips. A gesture that the Greeks misinterpreted as a sign of silence or secrecy, but which was actually the hieroglyphic determinative for child. Isis nursing Horus became one of the most popular images in Egyptian religion and art, a powerful symbol of maternal love, divine protection, and the hope for renewal. Many scholars see in this imagery a precursor to later Christian iconography of the Madonna and Child. Only when Horus had come of age, had grown into a strong young god, skilled in warfare and governance, did Isis present her son to the world as Osiris's legitimate heir. The boy who had once been depicted as a vulnerable child with a finger held to his lips was now a mighty warrior god, a falcon-headed youth with the strength to face Set and reclaim his father's throne. Horus the Avenger and the Contendings of Horus and Set. When Horus reached adulthood, the time arrived to challenge Set and redeem his father's legacy. The conflict between Horus and Set became the most famous rivalry in Egyptian mythology, a series of dramatic contests often called the Contendings of Horus and Set, preserved most completely in a New Kingdom papyrus, the Chester Beatty Papyrus I, that tells the story with surprising humor and earthiness alongside its cosmic significance. The two gods disputed the rule of Egypt before the divine tribunal, each insisting on his right to the throne. The rest of the gods assembled to judge the matter, meeting in various locations, sometimes in the broad hall of the chief god, sometimes on the island in the midst, a mythical island in the primeval waters where judgment could be rendered impartially. At times, the sun god Ra-Horakhti himself presided over the court. At other times, the gods sought wisdom from elder deities like Thoth, the wise mediator, or even the primordial goddess Neith of Sais, the mother of Ra and one of the most ancient deities. Yet the case was not straightforward, for Set argued that as Osiris's brother and as a powerful proven force, he had earned the right to kingship. He pointed to his own strength. He was the mightiest of warriors, the defender of Ra's sunboat against the serpent Apophis every night. Without Set's power, he claimed, the sun would be devoured and the world would end in chaos. Moreover, he argued, Osiris was dead and no longer eligible to rule, and his son Horus was young and untested. The throne should go to the strong, not merely to the heir. Horus, on the other hand, asserted that he was the son of Osiris and the direct lineal successor, and that Set's usurpation was a crime against Ma'at. The throne belonged to him by right of inheritance. To usurp that right was to violate the fundamental order of the universe. Furthermore, he was not weak. Though young, he was the son of two powerful deities, Osiris and Isis, and had inherited their divine strength. The gods deliberated and debated, but no quick consensus emerged. Ra-Horakhti, who was old and sometimes cranky, seemed to favor Set, perhaps because Set defended his boat each night, or perhaps because Ra was biased toward the older, established power. But most of the other gods, led by Thoth, favored Horus's claim based on the principle of rightful inheritance. Isis, of course, vigorously advocated for her son, and her eloquence and magic made her a formidable presence in the tribunal. The debates went on and on. According to the papyrus, the contendings lasted 80 years, with no resolution. Frustrated, the gods decided that Horus and Set should prove their worth through various contests and trials. These contests form some of the most colorful episodes in Egyptian mythology. The boat race. In one contest, Horus and Set agreed to a boat race down the Nile. However, there was a catch. The boats had to be made of stone. This was clearly a test of magical skill, not just seamanship. Horus cleverly constructed a boat of pine wood and covered it with gypsum plaster to make it look like stone. Set, taking the challenge literally, actually built a boat of stone, which promptly sank when launched into the Nile. Enraged at being tricked and at his humiliation, Set transformed into a hippopotamus and attacked Horus's boat from underwater, trying to sink it. The contest ended in chaos, with no clear winner. The hippopotamus battle. At another time, their conflict erupted into outright war, with violent battles that raged for days. The two could transform into different shapes as they fought, and they famously took the forms of hippopotami and dueled ferociously underwater for 3 days and 3 nights. Isis watched from the shore, worried for her son. She couldn't see what was happening beneath the murky water, so she crafted a magical harpoon and hurled it into the Nile, hoping to strike Set. However, the harpoon struck Horus instead. Realizing her error, Isis used magic to recall the harpoon. She threw it again, and this time it struck Set. But when Set cried out, "Is it right to attack your own brother, Isis?" her heart softened, for Set was indeed her brother, and family ties ran deep. And she pulled the harpoon out, releasing him. Horus, witnessing his mother's seeming betrayal, emerged from the water in a blind rage. In his fury at what he perceived as Isis helping Set, Horus cut off his mother's head with a knife. In the text, it says he cut off her head with his knife like a fierce leopard. This shocking act, a son attacking his mother, was seen as a grievous violation of Ma'at. Horus fled into the desert mountains, carrying his mother's head, pursued by the wrath of the gods. Set found Horus resting under a tree, and in revenge for all their battles, seized Horus and gouged out both his eyes, leaving him blind and helpless. Set buried the eyes in the desert, where they transformed into lotus flowers, or in some versions, they grew into the sun and moon. Meanwhile, the goddess Hathor came upon the blinded Horus. Moved by compassion, Hathor the Beautiful, the golden goddess of love and joy, became a healer. She caught a gazelle and milked it, then poured the milk into Horus's empty eye sockets. Miraculously, Horus's eyes were restored, though in some versions it is Thoth who heals the eyes with his magic. Thus, the Eye of Horus, or Wedjat, meaning the whole one or the healed one, became one of the most powerful symbols in Egyptian religion, representing healing, wholeness, and protection. The eye symbol was used extensively in amulets, painted on coffins, and incorporated into royal regalia. As for Isis, the gods took pity on her and Thoth magically replaced her head, but instead of giving her back her original human head, he gave her the head of a cow, topped with horns and the sun disk. Thus, Isis took on one of the forms of Hathor, or became identified with Hathor in this aspect, and this cow-headed Isis became a symbol of motherhood and nourishment. Set's attempted sexual assault. Perhaps the strangest episode in the Contendings involves Set's attempt to humiliate Horus sexually. According to the papyrus, Set invited Horus to spend the night at his house, seemingly in a gesture of reconciliation. But during the night, Set attempted to rape Horus, seeking to establish dominance over him in the most humiliating way possible. In Egyptian culture, the passive partner in a sexual act was seen as submissive and inferior. However, Horus was alert and caught Set's semen in his hand. In the morning, Horus showed his mother what had happened. Isis, horrified and furious, cut off Horus's hand to remove the pollution and threw it into the Nile, then magically created a new hand for Horus. But Isis and Horus devised a counterplan. Isis took some of Horus's semen and spread it on lettuces in Set's garden. Lettuce was Set's favorite food and was associated with male sexuality in Egyptian culture because its sap was thought to resemble semen. When Set ate the lettuces, he unknowingly consumed Horus's semen. Later, before the divine tribunal, Set boasted that he had dominated Horus sexually. But Thoth, ever the wise judge, decided to test the truth. He called out to the semen of both gods to reveal where they were. Set's semen answered from the Nile, where Isis had thrown Horus's severed hand, while Horus's semen answered from inside Set's body. The semen of Horus even manifested as a golden sun disk emerging from Set's forehead, causing Set tremendous humiliation. The gods laughed at Set's shame, and this episode demonstrated that Horus had outwitted Set. Isis's clever trick. Throughout these contendings, Isis herself sometimes intervened to tip the balance in favor of her son, using her cleverness and magic. In one famous episode, Isis transformed herself into a beautiful young woman and approached Set when he was away from the court. Feigning innocence and distress, she told Set a made-up story, that she was a widow, her husband, a cattle herder, had died, and an evil stranger had come and stolen her husband's property. Now this stranger was mistreating her son and keeping the inheritance that rightfully belonged to the boy. She beseeched mighty Set, known for his strength and justice, to judge the case. Set, not realizing the parable mirrored his own situation with Horus, indignantly replied that the murderer was clearly in the wrong and that the property should be given to the legitimate son. Should one give the cattle to a stranger while the son of the master is yet alive? He thundered. With that, Isis revealed her true form, resuming her divine appearance in a flash of light, and triumphantly declared that Set had passed judgment against himself. By his own words, he had admitted that the son, Horus, should inherit from his father, Osiris, not an outsider or brother, Set. Enraged at being tricked, Set attempted to attack Isis for her deception, but the other gods restrained him. After 80 years of trials and battles, the great contest finally came to an end. The gods, tired of the strife and the endless arguments, turned for final guidance to one who was ancient and wise, the goddess Neith of Sighs, mother of the gods and one of the primordial creator deities, sometimes said to be even older than Noon. They sent a letter to Neith asking her to decide who should rule Egypt. Neith responded with crystal clarity and authority. She declared unequivocally that Horus must be given the throne of Egypt, for he was the legitimate heir of Osiris. To usurp the rightful heir would be to violate Ma'at, and such a violation could not be tolerated. As for Set, Neith suggested he should be appeased with other boons to compensate him for not receiving the throne. Specifically, Neith proposed that Set be awarded dominion over the desert lands and foreign countries, and that he be given 2 foreign goddesses as brides, Anat and Astarte, Semitic goddesses who had been incorporated into the Egyptian pantheon, who were known for their beauty and fierceness. Furthermore, Neith warned that if the Ennead did not make Horus king, she herself would unleash her wrath. She threatened that the sky would fall and crash down upon the earth, destroying everything. The gods took Neith's advice very seriously. At last, Horus was formally declared the rightful king of Egypt. The decision was proclaimed before the divine tribunal, and Ra-Horakhti, though he had initially favored Set, ultimately accepted the judgment, convinced by Thoth's reasoning and by Neith's authoritative decree, and perhaps by the threat of cosmic catastrophe if he refused. And so, Horus was crowned with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, receiving the crook and flail of kingship. All the gods rejoiced that Ma had prevailed. The long injustice done to Osiris was corrected. His son ruled in his place. Order was restored to the 2 lands. Set's fate and continued role. In the wake of Horus's victory, Set's fate varied in different tellings and different periods. In many accounts, Horus wished to execute Set to fully avenge all the evil he had done, the murder of Osiris, the usurpation of the throne, the many attacks on Horus himself. Indeed, Horus might have slain Set then and there, but the god Thoth and others intervened, counseling that Set still had a cosmic role to play. The gods did punish Set by exiling him from the fertile Nile Valley, condemning him to live as lord of the deserts and foreign lands forever, away from the ordered world of Egypt proper. Yet they did not destroy him, for complete destruction of such a powerful force might have consequences. Set's power over storms and chaos would be turned to useful purposes. In a later religious interpretation, especially prominent during the New Kingdom, Set is rehabilitated somewhat. Every night, as the sun god Ra travels through the underworld in his bark, it is Set who stands at the prow with spear in hand, defending Ra by attacking the serpent Apophis, Apep, the great enemy of the sun. Set's fierce, violent nature, his love of combat, and his tremendous strength made him the perfect defender against the forces of absolute chaos represented by Apophis. Thus, even the force of disorder is made to serve the maintenance of cosmic order. In this way, the Egyptians acknowledged that chaos, though subdued, could never wholly eliminated. It was a permanent part of the universe, but it could be harnessed and directed to uphold Ma'at. Interestingly, Set was still honored and worshipped in certain regions and periods. The Ramesside pharaohs, 19th and 20th dynasties, particularly honored Set. Seti I's very name means man of Set, and Ramesses II had Set as one of his patron deities. In the eastern delta, where Set had ancient cult centers, he remained a popular god. It was only in the later periods, especially after Egypt was conquered by foreigners like the Persians and Greeks, that Set became increasingly demonized, identified with foreign enemies, and eventually with the principle of evil itself. By the post-Ptolemaic and Roman periods, Set was seen almost purely as a villain, and his name and image were sometimes destroyed in inscriptions, just as he had destroyed Osiris. But in earlier times, Set was more ambiguous, a necessary part of the cosmos, representing the wild, untamed, dangerous forces of nature that must be acknowledged and, if possible, directed toward protective ends. The establishment of divine kingship. With Horus's ascension, the divine drama reached a resolution. Osiris, now permanently enthroned in the Duat as king and judge of the dead, was avenged and could rest peacefully. Horus, son of Isis and Osiris, ruled the living world as Egypt's divine pharaoh, bringing Ma'at back to the two lands. Isis, joyful at her son's success, now took her place as the queen mother and advisor to King Horus, her perseverance and magical skill finally rewarded. The universe, which had been threatened by division and strife, was unified again under the rightful rule. The balance was restored. This resolution established the sacred template for all future pharaonic rule in Egypt. The myth provided the ideological foundation for kingship. Just as Horus succeeded Osiris, every human pharaoh was regarded as a living Horus on the throne, the inheritor of divine kingship. When a pharaoh died, he went to his Ka and became one with Osiris, the lord of the dead, while his successor took on the role of Horus. Thus, there was an eternal cycle. Every king was Horus during his reign and Osiris after death. In myth, Isis's role as protector of Horus was mirrored by each reigning king's mother, who often wielded great influence as queen mother. The struggle of Horus and Set, with its final victory of right over might, set the standard that legitimized the pharaohs. The throne belongs to the rightful heir, the son of Osiris, not to the usurper or outsider. This principle of orderly succession and legitimacy was a cornerstone of Ma'at in Egyptian political thought, though in practice, succession could be contested and irregular, as various periods of civil war and dynastic change attest. The pharaoh's official titulary reinforced these mythic connections. From the Old Kingdom onward, every pharaoh had 5 royal names, including the Horus name, identifying him as Horus incarnate, and the son of Ra name, his birth name, linking him to the sun god. Official art showed the pharaoh in intimate contact with the gods, being nursed by Hathor or Isis as an infant, being crowned by Horus and Set, representing the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, shaking hands with or being embraced by Ra Horakti, standing before Osiris's throne. These images weren't metaphorical, but expressed a real belief that the king was semi-divine, a mediator between gods and humans. The well-being of Egypt was directly tied to the king's proper fulfillment of his mythic role. If the king upheld Ma'at, ruling justly, performing the proper rituals, maintaining the temples, then the gods would be pleased, the Nile would flood at the right time and the right amount, the crops would grow, foreigners would be kept at bay, and cosmic order would hold. If the king failed in his duties, or if there was no king during the intermediate periods of Egyptian history when central authority collapsed, then chaos threatened: drought, famine, invasion, civil strife. The myth of Horus and Set thus wasn't just an ancient story, but a living charter that explained how the world should work and what happened when that order broke down. Part 3. The Sun's Journey and the Geography of the Duat. With the royal triumph secured on Earth, the cosmic order that began at creation was reaffirmed. But even as Horus ruled the land of the living, another cycle was ongoing, a cycle that touched every being, mortal and divine, the daily journey of the sun through the sky and the underworld, and the parallel journey of human souls into the afterlife. The sun's daily cycle and nightly journey. Every evening, as the red sun descended in the west, the ancient Egyptians believed that the sun god, now in his aged form as Atum Ra, boarded his golden bark, called the Bark of Millions or the Bark of Ra, and began a voyage through the realm of darkness. This vast underworld, called the Duat, also spelled Duat or Tuat, was a mysterious landscape beneath the horizon, existing in a liminal space between the earthly world and the purely spiritual realm. It was neither wholly underground nor wholly otherworldly, but a complex geography with rivers, lakes, caverns, deserts, and gates. The Duat was described in various funerary texts, most famously in the Books of the Underworld, the Amduat, that which is in the underworld, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, and the Book of the Earth. These texts, painted on the walls of royal tombs, particularly in the Valley of the Kings, provided detailed maps and descriptions of the Duat, showing what the sun god encountered each hour of the night and what the deceased soul would experience on its own journey. The sun's bark was crewed by various deities who assisted Ra in his nightly voyage. These included Sia, divine perception or knowledge, Hu, divine utterance or command, Heka, magic, Mehen, the Coiled One, a serpent god who wrapped himself protectively around Ra's cabin, Apuat, the Opener of the Ways, a wolf or jackal god who scouted ahead, and various other gods and goddesses who served as rowers, navigators, or defenders. For the 12 hours of night, the sun god traveled through these regions, bringing light to the shadowed souls who dwelt there and battling the forces of chaos that lurked in the darkness. The journey was arduous and filled with perils. At every hour, new obstacles arose: monstrous serpents with knives for teeth, lakes of fire that could incinerate the unwary, demons who sought to prevent the sun's passage, and vast deserts of absolute darkness where even the gods could lose their way. The threat of Apophis. The greatest enemy was the arch-serpent Apophis, Apep in Egyptian, a colossal snake, sometimes described as being many miles long, who each night attempted to ambush Ra's boat and devour the sun, threatening to halt the sunrise forever and plunge the world into eternal darkness. Apophis was the embodiment of chaos, disorder, and non-existence, Isfit. Unlike Set, who was a god with a defined role in the cosmos, Apophis was purely evil, purely destructive. He was not truly a god, but rather an anti-creation force, seeking to drag the universe back into the chaos of none. Each night, at a particular point in the journey, often the 7th hour, in the middle of the night, when darkness was deepest, Apophis would attack. Various texts describe the battle in dramatic terms. In some versions, Apophis would drink all the water from the underworld river, causing Ra's bark to run aground in the dry riverbed, stranded and vulnerable. In others, Apophis coiled himself around the bark, his massive body constricting the boat, trying to crush it and its divine passengers. Sometimes Apophis used his hypnotic gaze to paralyze the gods, or breathed fire and darkness to extinguish Ra's light. But Ra was not defenseless. He had strong allies on his boat. The great serpent Mehen, the Coiled One, would uncoil himself from around Ra's cabin and engage Apophis directly, serpent against serpent. Isis and Nephthys would stand at the prow and stern, reciting powerful magical spells to bind Apophis and weaken him. Set, the god of storms and violence, now redeemed after his defeat by Horus, stood at the prow of Ra's bark as the primary defender, wielding his great spear. With tremendous force, Set would thrust his spear into Apophis's body again and again, driving the serpent back. The texts describe how Set would pierce Apophis, and the serpent would vomit up the water he had swallowed, allowing the bark to float free again. Other gods would join the attack, shooting arrows into Apophis or binding him with ropes and nets. Sometimes the deceased souls of righteous humans who had passed the judgment would assist in the battle, hacking at Apophis with knives. The serpent would be chopped into pieces, burned with fire, or bound with chains, but he could never be permanently killed. As an embodiment of chaos, Apophis was eternal. Each defeat only forced him to retreat into the depths until the next night, when he would reform and attack again. The struggle was perpetual, reflecting the Egyptian belief that chaos could be contained and defeated repeatedly, but never finally eliminated. Maintaining Ma'at was an endless task, requiring constant vigilance. In temples across Egypt, priests performed rituals to assist Ra in defeating Apophis. These rituals involved making wax figurines of the serpent and then destroying them, stabbing them, cutting them into pieces, burning them, while reciting curses and spells against Apophis. These were acts of sympathetic magic, intended to weaken Apophis and support Ra's victory. The daily temple rituals weren't just for show. They were seen as essential to maintaining cosmic order, helping ensure the sun would rise the next morning. The 12 hours of night. As the hours of night progressed, Ra's bark passed through 12 distinct regions or hours, each with its own landscape and inhabitants. These we described in elaborate detail in funerary texts such as the Duat and the Book of Gates, which served as guidebooks not just for Ra, but also for the deceased who hoped to follow in his path. First hour. The bark enters the Duat through a gateway in the western horizon. The landscape here is still relatively familiar, with rivers and fields, though everything is in twilight. The deceased souls who have just died arrive here and begin their journey. Guardian deities check each soul's credentials. Do they know the proper spells? Have they been properly buried? Before allowing them to proceed deeper into the Duat. Second and third hours. The bark travels through the waters of Osiris, agricultural fields, the field of offerings, where blessed souls labor happily. The waters are life-giving, and fish swim through celestial streams. Here dwell souls who have passed judgment and are enjoying a preview of their eternal reward. Ra blesses them as he passes, ensuring their crops grow tall. Fourth and fifth hours. The path becomes more difficult. The bark must pass through a region called the Difficult Waterway, or Land of Sokar, Sokar being an ancient falcon god of the dead, sometimes identified with Osiris. This is a place of deep caves and absolute darkness. The river dries up entirely, and the bark must be dragged over land or magically lifted over obstacles. Giant snakes and monsters lurk here. This is often where Apophis makes his primary attack. The gods must use all their power to navigate this region safely. Sixth hour. The deepest point of the underworld, the ultimate nadir. Here, in a cavern of profound stillness called the Cavern of Sokar, or the Secret Place, Ra encounters Osiris. The sun god and the Lord of the Dead are united in a mystical fusion. The ancient texts describe it as Ra entering into Osiris's embrace, or Ra illuminating Osiris who lies in his secret chamber. In this union, they exchange their powers. Ra gives Osiris the light and energy needed for the regeneration of the dead, and Osiris gives Ra the regenerative vitality needed to be reborn at dawn. One text from the tomb of Seti I says, "This great god rests in Osiris, and Osiris rests in this great god. They speak to one another, and Ra joins with Osiris." Another text describes it more abstractly. Ra enters into Osiris, and Osiris enters into Ra. To the Egyptian mind, this meant that the cycles of day-night and life-death were intimately linked. Without Osiris's renewing touch at midnight, the sun might not rise again. Without the sun's light, Osiris could not offer resurrection to souls. This was the moment of deepest darkness, but also the moment of transformation, where death becomes the seed of new life. Seventh hour. Having been rejuvenated by the union with Osiris, Ra's bark emerges from the cavern and continues. Here, the enemies of Ra face judgment. The gods bind and punish the wicked, those who broke Ma'at in life, casting them into pits of fire or ordering demons to torture them. Fiery serpents breathe flames onto the damned. This region shows that the afterlife was not universally blissful. Those who had been found wanting faced terrible fates. 8th through 10th hours. The bark continues through various regions, halls of the gods, lakes of fire, islands where different classes of the dead dwell. At each stage, Ra's light revitalizes the souls, calling out to them and bringing them back to consciousness. Awake, you who are in the Duat, Ra comes to see you. The blessed dead respond to his call, praising him and joining in his journey. 11th hour. The bark approaches the eastern horizon. Here, preparations are made for Ra's rebirth. The gods take up their stations. The serpent that will help birth the sun prepares itself. In some texts, a great snake named Life of the Gods, or sometimes Isis in serpent form, helps to tow the sunboat upward toward the eastern sky. Or, alternatively, the scarab beetle god, Khepri, he who comes into being, takes shape, ready to push the solar disk up above the horizon, just as scarab beetles push balls of dung across the ground, which the Egyptians saw as a symbol of the sun's movement. 12th hour, the moment of rebirth. The sunboat enters the body of a great serpent in the east, in some texts, and emerges from its mouth as the newborn sun. Or, in other versions, the goddess Nut, whose body forms the sky, swallows the sun in the west and gives birth to it in the east, making the sun literally her child, born anew each dawn. At last, with the break of dawn, Ra emerges from the Duat transformed. He is reborn as a glowing child, or as Khepri, the radiant scarab beetle pushing the solar disk. The disk rises above the horizon, and immediately Ra transforms into a mighty falcon again, Ra Horakti, Ra, Horus of the horizon, soaring into the sky, bringing daylight to the world. The new day begins, and all living things rejoice. By midday, the sun god is once more in the fullness of his strength as Ra, symbolized by the blazing sun disk at its zenith. By sunset, he ages into Atum, an old man who has completed his daily cycle and is ready to disappear into the west and begin the cycle anew. The whole process, repeated every single day for millions of years, demonstrated the eternal nature of Ma'at. Despite temporary setbacks, the darkness of night, the threat of Apophis, order and life would always prevail over chaos and death. To the Egyptians, this diurnal cycle was proof that creation was not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. The sun's journey through the Duat also provided a model for human souls making their own passage through the afterlife. Just as Ra overcame obstacles and joined with Osiris to be reborn, so did each deceased person hope to overcome trials, unite with Osiris and the sun, and achieve their own rebirth in the field of reeds. The Egyptians made extensive preparations to equip souls for this journey, in the form of spells, maps, and rituals that we collectively called the Book of the Dead and related funerary texts. More deities of death and the afterlife. The Egyptian pantheon included numerous deities associated with death, burial, and the afterlife, each with specific roles. Anubis, Inpu or Ampu in Egyptian, the jackal-headed god of mummification and cemeteries. As we've seen, he was said to be the illegitimate son of Osiris and Nephthys, adopted by Isis. Anubis presided over the embalming process and was the guardian of tombs. His black color represented both the black soil of Egypt, fertile and life-giving, and the discoloration of mummified flesh. In the judgment scene, Anubis weighs the heart and ensures the scales are balanced. He was often depicted lying atop a shrine or chest representing his guardianship of the deceased, or kneeling beside the scales of judgment. Thoth, Jehuti in Egyptian, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, magic, and the moon. Thoth was said to have invented writing and therefore all knowledge. He was the scribe of the gods, recording everything that happened. In the Hall of Ma'at, Thoth records the verdict of the weighing of the heart, inscribing the result on his scroll. He was also a mediator and judge, using his wisdom to resolve disputes among gods and to help the deceased navigate the afterlife. His major cult center was at Hermopolis, Khmunu, where he was sometimes identified as the creator god who hatched from the cosmic egg. Nephthys, Nebet-Het, lady of the house or temple, sister of Isis, Osiris, and Set, wife of Set but ally of Isis. Nephthys was associated with mourning and funeral rites. Together with Isis, she was often depicted as a protector of the dead, with the two goddesses standing at the head and foot of coffins or the bier of Osiris. Nephthys represented the night or the hidden aspects of death, complementing Isis, who represented light and life. Both goddesses were sometimes shown as kites, small hawks, hovering over the deceased, using their wings to fan life into the dead. Ma'at, both a goddess and a concept. Ma'at, depicted as a woman with an ostrich feather on her head, or simply as the feather itself, personified truth, justice, cosmic order, and balance. She was said to be the daughter of Ra and came into being at the moment of creation. The pharaoh's primary duty was to uphold Ma'at on earth. Judges and viziers wore symbols of Ma'at when performing their duties. In the afterlife, Ma'at's feather was the standard against which all hearts were measured. Amit, also called Amat, devourer or eater of hearts, the fearsome composite creature who lurked near the scales of judgment. She had the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, three of the most dangerous animals in Egypt combined into one terrifying being. She was not worshipped as a goddess, but rather feared as an enforcer of cosmic justice. To the Egyptians, this diurnal cycle was proof that creation was not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. The sun's journey through the Duat also provided a model for human souls making their own passage through the afterlife. Just as Ra overcame obstacles and joined with Osiris to be reborn, so did each deceased person hope to overcome trials, unite with Osiris and the sun, and achieve their own rebirth in the field of reeds. The Egyptians made extensive preparations to equip souls for this journey, in the form of spells, maps, and rituals that we collectively called the Book of the Dead and related funerary texts. The four sons of Horus: Imseti, Hapi, Duamutef, Kebehesenuef. These deities protected the internal organs stored in canopic jars. Imseti, human-headed, guarded the liver. Hapi, baboon-headed, guarded the lungs. Duamutef, jackal-headed, guarded the stomach. And Kebehesenuef, falcon-headed, guarded the intestines. Each was associated with a cardinal direction and was protected by a goddess. Imseti by Isis, Hapi by Nephthys, Duamutef by Neith, and Kebehesenuef by Serpent. Wepwawet, Upuwaut, opener of the ways. A wolf or jackal god who preceded the king in battle and opened the roads for both the living and the dead. He was a psychopump, guiding souls through the Duat and helping them find their way. His cult center was at Asut in Middle Egypt. Serpent, Selket, she who causes the throat to breathe. A scorpion goddess who protected against venomous stings and bites. She was one of the goddesses who protected Osiris and guarded canopic jars. Serpent was invoked in healing spells and was associated with medicine. Nekbet and Wadjet, the vulture goddess of Upper Egypt and the cobra goddess of Lower Egypt, respectively. Together, they symbolized the unification of Egypt and were protective deities. Nekbet was associated with birth and childbirth. Vultures were thought to be devoted mothers, while Wadjet was a fierce protector who could spit fire at enemies. Part 4. The Human Journey Through Death. We now turn to the human side of the underworld journey, the path that each soul must travel after death, culminating in the Great Judgment in the Hall of Ma'at. The Egyptian concept of the soul. The ancient Egyptians had a sophisticated understanding of human nature, conceiving the person as composed of multiple souls or spirit components. To the Egyptian mind, a human being was not a simple unity of body and soul, but rather a complex assemblage of various elements, each with its own nature and destiny. The body, Kat or Ha, the physical form which had to be preserved through mummification to serve as a home for the spiritual components. Without a preserved body, the other elements had no anchor in the physical world. The Ka. Perhaps the most important spiritual element, the Ka was one's life force or vital essence, a sort of spiritual double or twin created by the god Khnum at the moment of birth. Every person, god, and even some objects had a Ka. The Ka was what made something alive and animated. It was the divine spark. When a person died, the Ka separated from the body, but remained closely connected to it, dwelling in the tomb. The Ka needed sustenance, which is why food and drink offerings were left in tombs, either physical offerings that the Ka consumed spiritually or representations in art that the Ka could magically access. The hieroglyph for Ka was two upraised arms, possibly representing an embrace or receiving. Royal Ka was particularly powerful and was associated with kingship itself. The Ba. The Ba was more like one's personality, individuality, or mobility, the aspects that made each person unique. It was often depicted as a human-headed bird, usually a falcon with a human head, that could flutter between the worlds, leaving the tomb to revisit the places the deceased had loved in life, then returning to the body at night. The Ba was what allowed the deceased to have freedom of movement in the afterlife. It could travel with Ra in his sunboat or enjoy the pleasures of the field of reeds. The Ba was closely connected to consciousness and could experience sensations. The Ak, sometimes spelled Aku, affective spirit or transfigured spirit. This was not present at birth, but was created after death if the deceased successfully passed through the trials of the afterlife. When the Ka and Ba reunited and were properly transfigured through funerary rites and judgment, they formed an Ak, a glorified, effective spirit that had power and freedom in the afterlife. The Ak could shine among the stars, travel with the gods, and intervene in the world of the living. Becoming an Ak was the ultimate goal of the funerary process. The name, Ren. A person's name was a vital part of their identity. To erase someone's name was to threaten their very existence, which is why damnatio memoria, the destruction of names and images, was such a terrible curse. Conversely, speaking the name of the deceased kept them alive. This is why tomb inscriptions often included the phrase, "May his or her name live," or "Speak my name and I shall live." The shadow, Shut. The shadow was a mysterious element, perhaps representing the dark or hidden aspects of the person. The shadow had some autonomy and could be separated from the person. It was associated with protection and could act as a guardian. The heart, Ib. Unlike in modern Western thought, where the brain is the seat of consciousness, Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of thought, emotion, memory, and will. The heart recorded everything a person did and thought throughout their life, which is why it was weighed in the judgment. The heart was the only organ left in the body during mummification, or if removed accidentally, it was placed back, because it was essential for the afterlife. Death and burial practices. When an Egyptian died, an elaborate series of rituals began to prepare them for the afterlife. The process varied depending on the person's wealth and status, but the basic elements were consistent. Mourning. Immediately after death, professional female mourners, often including family members, would wail and lament, tearing their clothes, throwing dust on their heads, and sometimes striking their breasts. This public mourning was not just for emotional expression, but was believed to help the deceased spirit hear the grief and know they were valued. The mourning cries mimicked those of Isis and Nephthys for Osiris. Purification. The body was washed and purified, beginning the process of transformation from a mere corpse to a sacred vessel. Mummification. The body was taken to the Per Nefer, House of Beauty, or Purification House, where specialized embalmers worked. The chief embalmer often wore a mask of Anubis, ritually becoming the god during the process. The procedure took 70 days and involved 1. Removal of internal organs through an incision in the left side. The brain was extracted through the nose using a long hook and was discarded, as Egyptians didn't recognize its importance. The organs were placed in canopic jars after being preserved. 2. The body was packed and covered with natron salt from Wadi Natron, which dried out all moisture over 40 days. 3. After drying, the body was washed again, anointed with oils and unguents, myrrh, frankincense, juniper oil, cassia, cinnamon, and sometimes the body cavities were packed with linen, sawdust, or sand to restore the natural shape. 4. The body was wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages, with amulets and protective charms placed between the layers. Each finger and toe might be wrapped individually, then the limbs, then the torso, finally the head, with the face sometimes covered by a portrait mask. The wrapping could take 15 days. 5. A funerary mask was placed over the head. For wealthy individuals, this might be made of gold or cartonnage, painted plaster, depicting the deceased's idealized face or the face of a god. 6. The wrapped mummy was placed in a coffin or nested series of coffins, which was decorated with protective spells and images of gods. The funeral procession. On the day of burial, a great procession carried the mummy to the tomb. The coffin was dragged on a sledge, drawn by oxen. Priests led the way, burning incense and chanting. Professional mourners followed, wailing. The procession would stop at various points for rituals. Opening of the mouth ceremony. This crucial ritual was performed at the tomb entrance just before sealing the mummy inside. The ceremony involved touching various parts of the mummy, or a statue of the deceased, with ritual tools, including an adze, a peshesh kef knife, and other implements, while reciting spells. This ceremony opened the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose of the deceased, symbolically restoring their senses so they could eat, see, hear, breathe, and speak in the afterlife. It reenacted what Anubis and Horus had done for Osiris. Burial. Finally, the mummy was placed in the burial chamber of the tomb along with grave goods, food, drink, furniture, clothing, jewelry, servant statues, ushapti, and most importantly, texts to guide them in the afterlife, Book of the Dead scrolls, or texts painted on the coffin or tomb walls. The tomb was sealed and prayers were spoken to protect it. Continued offerings. The deceased's family, or priests paid to maintain the tomb, would make regular offerings at the tomb chapel, providing food and drink for the ka and reciting prayers to keep the deceased's name alive. Funerary texts, pyramid texts, coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead. The Egyptians left 3 major collections of funerary literature, each building on the previous. Pyramid texts. C. 2400 to 2300 BCE. The oldest religious texts in the world, these spells were carved into the walls of the burial chambers and passages of Old Kingdom pyramids, particularly those of the 5th and 6th dynasty pharaohs, starting with Unas. Written in hieroglyphs painted in green or blue, the colors of vegetation and rebirth, the pyramid texts contained about 700 spells intended to protect the deceased pharaoh and help him ascend to the heavens to join with the gods. Many spells describe the king climbing a ladder to heaven, flying up as a bird, or being ferried across the sky. The focus was on the king's solar and stellar destiny, becoming one with Ra or dwelling among the circumpolar stars, the imperishable ones that never set below the horizon. Coffin texts, c. 2100 to 1800 BCE. During the Middle Kingdom, funerary texts became democratized. They were no longer exclusively for kings, but were adapted for non-royal elites. The coffin texts, so called because they were written on the interior of wooden coffins, giving the deceased a house of protective spells, expanded on the pyramid texts, adding about 1,185 spells total. The coffin texts emphasized the Osiris afterlife more than the solar afterlife, showing a shift in beliefs. They included more spells for transformation, allowing the Ba to become various creatures, protection against dangers, and navigation of the Duat. The famous Book of Two Ways, a map of the afterlife painted on some coffin floors, was part of the coffin texts. Book of the Dead, Arwe Naprat Maharo, Book of Coming Forth by Day. During the New Kingdom and later periods, funerary texts were compiled into a flexible collection known as the Book of the Dead. These were written on papyrus scrolls, allowing for beautiful colored illustrations, and placed in the tomb with the mummy. Unlike the earlier texts, which were fixed collections, the Book of the Dead was more like a menu. Different spells could be selected based on the deceased's needs and budget. There were about 200 spells total in the corpus, though most papyri contained only a selection. Wealthy individuals might have 100 or more spells, poorer individuals might have only a few key spells. The spells covered everything needed for the afterlife: spells for leaving the tomb and traveling in the Duat, spells for transformation, becoming a lotus, a phoenix, a golden falcon, etc., spells for avoiding the second death, spells to ensure the heart doesn't testify against the deceased, spells for breathing, drinking water, and eating in the afterlife, spells for passing the guardians and gates, the famous spell 125, containing the negative confession and the weighing of the heart, spells to access the field of reeds. Many papyri were beautifully illustrated with vignettes, showing the deceased performing various actions, interacting with gods, or the famous judgment scene. The most elaborate examples, like the Papyrus of Ani or the Papyrus of Hunefer in the British Museum, are masterpieces of ancient art. The soul's journey through the Duat. Upon death, according to these teachings, the Ba soul would awaken and find itself in the tomb. The first challenge was often simply leaving the tomb and descending into the Duat. The Ba had to fly out, calling upon spells to open the tomb's doors, which were sealed from the outside. "O you door of the horizon, open for me. Let me come forth by day. Let me have power over my legs." Once free of the tomb, the soul would begin its journey through the Duat, roughly paralleling the sun god's nightly voyage, but with different challenges specific to human souls. The journey was fraught with dangers. Gates and guardians. The Duat was divided into regions separated by gates, each guarded by fearsome beings with knives or flames. To pass these, the deceased needed to know their secret names and the correct passwords. For instance, spell 144 of the Book of the Ged provides the names of the 7 gates of Osiris and the guardians of each. Gate 1, its guardian is called Inverted of Face, Numerous of Forms. I know you, and I know your name. Gate 2, its guardian is called Caesar by the Throat. Stand aside, for I am Thoth. Gate 3, its guardian is called Eater of Excrement of his hindquarters. I pass by, for I am pure, and so on. And so on. Knowing these names gave the deceased power over the guardians, who would then open their gates. This emphasis on secret knowledge reflects the Egyptian belief that wisdom and learning were keys to success in the afterlife. The literate and educated had an advantage. They could read the spells, memorize the names, and navigate the Duat successfully. Dangerous creatures. Beyond the gates, the Duat was full of monsters, serpents who breathed fire, demons with knives who sought to dismember the unwary, crocodiles lurking in dark waters. The Book of the Dead includes many protective spells: spell for repelling a snake, spell for not being eaten by a snake, spell for repelling a crocodile, etc. Some spells were formulaic. Back, hidden one, do not come against me. I am, divine name. My protection is the protection of Ra. By identifying with a god or invoking divine protection, the deceased could ward off danger. The Desert of Fire. Some texts mention regions of intense heat where lakes of fire burned the wicked. The righteous, protected by their spells and their virtue, could pass through unharmed, their feet not even singed, but those who had lived in Isfet would be consumed. The Ferryman and the Lake. To reach the field of reeds, the deceased often had to cross a body of water, a celestial Nile or a lake, in a ferry boat. The ferryman was a cantankerous figure who would quiz the deceased. Do you know the names of the oars, the name of the rudder, the name of each plank? Only if the deceased could answer correctly, using spells from the Book of the Dead, would the ferryman agree to row them across. This test ensured only those properly equipped with knowledge could reach paradise. Throughout the journey, the Ba could invoke various gods for help. Calling upon Thoth would grant wisdom and guidance. Calling upon Isis would provide magical protection. Invoking Ra would bring light into darkness. The journey required both knowledge, the spells, and virtue, having lived in Ma'at, but the emphasis varied depending on the period. Earlier texts stressed knowledge more, while later texts increasingly emphasized moral behavior. The weighing of the heart, the great judgment. All of these trials culminated in the most important event of the soul's existence, the weighing of the heart in the Hall of Ma'at, also called the Hall of Two Truths. This ceremony was the final judgment to determine whether the deceased had lived a life in accordance with Ma'at, truth, righteousness, or a life weighed down by Isfet, wrongdoing, chaos. The scene is richly described in chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead and depicted on famous papyri such as that of Ani, Hunefer, and Anhai. Let us imagine entering the Hall of Ma'at with the eyes of a newly deceased soul. The hall is vast and awe-inspiring. Its ceiling is painted like the night sky, covered with golden stars against a deep blue background. The pillars are inscribed from floor to ceiling with texts of judgment and images of gods. The floor might show images of the primordial waters, reminding all present that Ma'at holds back chaos. There is a sense of immense gravity and solemnity. This is where all lives are weighed, where all truths are revealed, where no deception can stand. At the far end of the hall sits Osiris, majestic and serene, on a throne. He is depicted as a mummified king with green or black skin, the colors symbolizing fertility, resurrection, and the fertile Nile soil. Wearing the tall white Atef crown, a version of the white crown of Upper Egypt flanked by 2 ostrich feathers, and holding the crook and flail across his chest, the symbols of kingship and the shepherd of his people. His face is usually painted green or black, and his expression is calm, neither angry nor smiling, perfectly balanced. Osiris sits in judgment, but he does not actively participate. He receives the verdict from his fellow gods and welcomes or rejects based on what the scales reveal. Behind and around Osiris stand other deities. Isis and Nephthys, the devoted sisters, flank his throne as protectors and supporters. They wear their characteristic headdresses, Isis with the throne hieroglyph, Nephthys with the house hieroglyph. At Osiris's feet, atop a lotus flower, symbol of rebirth, stand the 4 sons of Horus, Imseti, Hapi, Duamutef, and Kebesenuef. These gods protected the deceased's organs during mummification and now stand witness to the judgment. Their presence reminds the deceased that they have been properly prepared and cared for. In the center of the hall stands the Great Balance Scale, the focal point of the entire scene. This is not a small merchant scale, but a massive balance with 2 large pans suspended from a horizontal beam balanced on a vertical post. The scales are often ornately decorated and may rest on a pedestal shaped like the Ma'at hieroglyph, or adorned with protective symbols. On one side of the scales sits the heart of the deceased, sometimes shown as a small heart-shaped amulet, sometimes as an actual anatomical heart, sometimes in a jar. The heart symbolically contains all the deeds, thoughts, and memories of the person's life. It is the recording device of the soul, the witness that cannot lie. As one spell says, "My heart of my mother, my heart of my forms, do not stand up as witness against me. Do not oppose me in the tribunal. Do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance." On the other side of the scales is the feather of Ma'at, a single ostrich feather, white and pure, symbolizing absolute truth and justice. The feather is intrinsically light, carrying no burden of sin or imperfection. It is perfect order, perfect balance, perfect truth. The question the scales answer is simple yet profound. Is the heart as light as the feather? Has the deceased lived in harmony with Ma'at? Attending the scale on one side is Anubis, the jackal-headed god of cemeteries and mummification. He appears in his role as psychopomp and guardian of the scales. Anubis is often depicted kneeling beside the scales, his hand reaching out to carefully adjust the balance or check the plumb line. He is described in inscriptions as "he who is upon his mountain," the desert cliffs overlooking cemeteries, "Lord of the sacred land," the necropolis, and "he who is in the place of embalming." Anubis's role here is crucial. He ensures the weighing is fair and accurate, that no thumb tips the scales, that justice is done. His dark form, usually painted black, gives a sense of dignity and solemn duty. The one who guarded your body during mummification now guards your soul during judgment. On the opposite side of the scales stands Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. In some depictions, Thoth appears as a baboon, but most commonly he has the head of an ibis, a long-beaked wading bird sacred to him, and the body of a man. He wears a lunar crown or simply a wig. In his hands, Thoth holds a scribal palette and reed pen, and before him is a scroll or writing board. Thoth is the recorder of the verdict. It is his duty to note the result with impeccable accuracy on his papyrus, documenting for eternity whether the deceased passed or failed. Thoth will also announce the verdict before the court. As the god of knowledge and truth, his judgment is considered absolutely impartial and accurate. Above the scale, or perched on top of its beam, a small baboon may be depicted, either another form of Thoth or a separate baboon deity representing wisdom and careful observation. In Egyptian art, baboons were associated with Thoth and with maintaining cosmic balance. The baboon watches the scales intently, serving as an additional witness and ensuring nothing amiss occurs. Witnessing the trial is a tribunal of gods. The Book of the Dead mentions 42 assessor deities, also called the 42 judges, one for each district, nome of Egypt, each representing a particular virtue or vice. These assessor gods sit in a long row, sometimes depicted as mummiform figures with various heads, falcons, jackals, snakes, etc., or simply as hieroglyphic symbols. Each has a specific name related to their function, such as Swallower of Shades, Breaker of Bones, Eater of Blood, Lord of Truth, etc. The deceased must address each one individually during the negative confession. Additionally, the great gods of the Ennead may also be present, seated in judgment: Ra, or Ra-Horakakti, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Horus, Hathor, and others. They observe silently, their divine presence adding weight to the proceedings. The scene creates an atmosphere of overwhelming divine authority. The deceased stands alone before the entire pantheon, with nowhere to hide and no possibility of deception. And lurking near the scale, waiting eagerly and hungrily, is Ammit, the devourer of the dead or eater of hearts. Ammit is a terrifying composite creature. She has the head of a crocodile, with its powerful jaws and many teeth, the forequarters, chest and front legs, of a lion, and the hindquarters, back legs and rump, of a hippopotamus. These three animals were among the most dangerous predators in ancient Egypt, and their combination into one being made Ammit the ultimate destroyer. She is depicted sitting or crouching near the scales, her crocodile mouth open, ready to pounce. Her eyes are fixed on the heart being weighed. If the heart fails the test, if it proves heavier than the feather, Ammit will leap forward and devour it entirely. She is not a goddess to be worshipped, but rather a force of destruction, the executioner who ensures that those who break Ma'at are removed from existence. The scene is set. Now the deceased soul, represented by their bawbird or by a small figure of the deceased themselves, often depicted standing nervously nearby, hands raised in prayer or supplication, must face judgment. The negative confession, declaration of innocence. The ritual begins with the negative confession, also called the Declaration of Innocence. This is one of the most important spells in the Book of the Dead, spell 125. The deceased must address the tribunal and declare their innocence of various sins. First comes the general declaration before Osiris and the assembled gods. Hail to you, great God, Lord of Ma'at. I have come to you, my Lord, to see your perfection. I know you, and I know the names of the 42 gods who are with you in the hall of Ma'at. I have come to you. I have brought Ma'at to you. I have repelled Isfit for you. I have not done wrong against people. I have not mistreated cattle. I have not sinned in the place of truth, the necropolis/temple. I have not known what should not be known, forbidden knowledge. I have not done evil. I am pure. I am pure. I am pure. I am pure. Then comes the detailed confession, where the deceased must address each of the 42 assessor gods by name and deny a specific sin before each. The deceased turns to face each judge in turn and makes their declaration. A typical series of denials goes like this. Hail, strider who came forth from Heliopolis, I have not done wrong. Hail, embracer of fire who came forth from Keraha, I have not robbed. Hail, nosy, who came forth from Hermopolis, I have not been covetous. Hail, swallower of shades, who came forth from the cavern, I have not stolen. Hail, dangerous one, who came forth from Rosatau, I have not slain people. Hail, double lion, who came forth from heaven, I have not destroyed food offerings. Hail, fiery eyes, who came forth from Heliopolis, I have not committed crimes. Hail, flame, who came forth backwards, I have not stolen the god's property. Hail, bonebreaker, who came forth from Heracleopolis, I have not told lies. Hail, green of flame, who came forth from Memphis, I have not taken food. Hail, cave dweller, who came forth from the west, I have not been contentious. Hail, white of teeth, who came forth from the Fayum, I have not violated any sacred time. Hail, blood eater, who came forth from the house of slaughter, I have not slaughtered sacred cattle. Hail, entrails eater, who came forth from the tribunal, I have not cheated measures. Hail, Lord of Ma'at, who came forth from Ma'ati, I have not stolen land. Hail, Wanderer, who came forth from Bubastis, I have not gossiped. Hail, Pale One, who came forth from Heliopolis, I have not made my voice loud, been arrogant. Hail, Doubly Evil, who came forth from Enjet, I have not offended against the god in my city. Hail, Wem, who came forth from the slatter place, I have not waded in water, illegally diverted irrigation. Hail, Guardian of the portal, who came forth from the place of the ritual, I have not blasphemed. Hail, Commander, who came forth from Winnet, I have not multiplied my speech overmuch, lied extensively. Hail, Bast, who came forth from the shrine, I have done no wrong, I have seen no evil. Hail, Doubly Fierce, who came backwards from the pit, I have not copulated with a boy. Hail, Fiery Feet, who came forth at twilight, I have not been false. Hail, Dark One, who came forth in the darkness, I have not reviled. Hail, Bringer of Offerings, who came forth from Sais, I have not been aggressive. Hail, Possessor of Faces, who came forth from Nejephet, I have not had a hasty heart, been impulsive. Hail, Accuser, who came forth from Ujjen, I have not transgressed my nature, acted out of character or role. Hail, Neheb Kau, the regulator of flames, who came forth from the city, I have not multiplied words in speaking, engaged in excessive or empty talk. Hail, He of the Dawn, who came forth from the house of Min, I have done no wrong, I have seen no evil. Hail, You of the Cavern, who came forth from the west, I have not cursed the king. Hail, Acting with his heart, who came forth from Chebut, I have not waded in water, blocked irrigation. Hail, Flowing One, who came forth from Noon, I have not been loud of voice, raised my voice in anger. Hail, Commander of People, who came forth from your shrine, I have not cursed a god. Hail, Neheb Nephert, who came forth from your cavern, I have not been arrogant. Hail, Neheb Kau, who came forth from your city, I have not made distinctions for myself, claimed special privileges unjustly. Hail, Provider of Heads, who came forth from your shrine, I have not increased wealth except with my own property. Hail, Bringer of his arm, who came forth from the darkness, I have not blasphemed the god of my city. Hail, Shining Teeth, who came forth from Tahiti, I have not defrauded the food portion in the temples. Hail, He who comes as Kenti, who came forth from the cavern, I have not taken the bread of a child. Hail, Guardian of the food, who came from the house of Kenmit, I have not sinned against the god of my town. Hail, White of Horns, who came forth from Siut, I have not slaughtered with evil intent animals sacred to the gods. There are variations in different papyri, but the essential structure remains, addressing each god by name and location and denying a specific sin. The sins renounced cover a remarkably wide range of ethical offenses, from murder and theft to lying, blasphemy, adultery, disturbing the peace, adultery, economic crimes like fraud and cheating measures, environmental crimes like diverting water from irrigation channels, showing disrespect, being too loud or arrogant, causing suffering, making someone weep or causing pain, damaging property, stealing food meant for gods or for children, and even minor social offenses like gossiping or being contentious. The list reveals what the Egyptians valued: respect for hierarchy, including the king and the gods, honesty and business dealings, respect for property, kindness to others, humility, proper use of resources, and maintaining social harmony. It's important to note that this isn't necessarily a literal autobiography. The Egyptians were practical people who recognized that no human is perfect. Rather, the negative confession was a ritual purification. By speaking these denials with conviction, the soul aligned itself with Ma'at and distanced itself from Isfet. The speech act itself had power. Moreover, the deceased was assisted by having memorized or having access to the spell written in their tomb or on their coffin. The words themselves, properly spoken, had magical efficacy to cleanse the heart and make the declarations true, or at least true enough to pass the test. After the verbal confession, some papyri show the deceased making additional appeals to their own heart, begging it not to testify against them. "O my heart that came from my mother, O my heart of my different ages." Do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not be opposed to me in the tribunal. Do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance. For you are my Ka, which was in my body, the protector who made my members hale. Go forth to the happy place whereto we speed. Do not make my name stink to the entourage who make men. This spell reflects an interesting anxiety. What if the heart, which records everything, reveals sins the person had forgotten or minimized? The heart must be convinced, or magically compelled, to remain silent about any failings and to appear light and pure. The weighing. At last, the declarations end and Thoth calls the pivotal moment. Let the heart be weighed against the feather of Mot. Anubis carefully places the heart on one scale pan, handling it with reverence and precision. He then places the feather of Mot on the other pan. The scales begin to move. The beam creaks slightly. The pans rise and fall, seeking equilibrium. The pointer at the center of the beam begins to move, indicating which side is heavier. All eyes, human, divine, and bestial, watch intently. Time seems to slow. The Ba soul of the deceased watches in terror and hope. Amit leans forward, drool dripping from her crocodile jaws, muscles tensed to spring. The 42 assessor gods observe in silent judgment. Osiris sits motionless on his throne, his painted face inscrutable. The scales tremble, the pointer quivers. There are 3 possible outcomes. 1. The heart is lighter or equal to the feather, justified, true of voice. In the ideal outcome, the heart is exactly equal in weight to the feather of Mot, or even slightly lighter. The scales balance perfectly, or the heart rises while the feather sinks or stays level. This means the deceased soul is true, pure, and righteous. The person has lived in Mot, or at least has been purified enough by the confession and by the funerary rites to pass the test. Thoth, watching the scales carefully and checking the plumb line and the pointer, sees the result. He picks up his reed ken, dips it in ink, and records on his papyrus, "The heart of name is lighter than the feather. Name is Ma Keru, true of voice, justified, vindicated." He announces this verdict to the assembled gods in a clear, carrying voice. Rejoicing ensues. The deceased soul trembles with relief and joy. The gods of the tribunal nod in approval. Some papyri show the deceased raising their hands in jubilation or in a gesture of praise to the gods. In many illustrated versions of the scene, Horus, often Horus the Younger, son of Isis and Osiris, representing the current living king and the principle of rightful succession, then takes the hand of the vindicated spirit and leads them forward to Osiris's throne. Horus acts as a psychopomp here, presenting the justified soul to his father. He says, "I have come to you, Wenifer, Osiris, and I bring to you name. His heart is true, having come forth from the balance, and he has not sinned against any god or goddess. Thoth has judged him according to the writings of the great Ennead, and Mot the Great was witness. Let there be given to him the bread and beer that comes forth in the presence of Osiris. Let him be like the followers of Horus forever." Osiris, upon hearing this, welcomes the newcomer kindly. He extends his crook toward the deceased or gestures for them to approach. Some texts record Osiris saying, "Welcome, true of voice one. Come, enter into the field of offerings, the field of reeds. You may live as the gods live. You may eat what they eat. Your Ba may go forth by day, and your shadow may find refreshment. Your name shall be called upon the earth among the living, and your name shall never perish." The heart is returned to the person, intact and whole, and now the person is effectively an Ach, a blessed, transfigured spirit with all their faculties and freedom. The Ka and Ba are reunited, and the deceased can now enter paradise. 2. The heart is heavier than the feather, condemned second death. However, if the scales show the heart to be heavier than the feather, meaning the person was laden with guilt, sin, and isfet, the scene turns dire. The pointer tips decisively toward the heart side. The heart sinks down, weighed down by the burden of wrongdoing. The feather rises, light and pure, untainted by any association with the evildoer. Thoth, his heart heavy with the sadness of failed potential, must record the terrible verdict. The heart of name is heavy with isfet. Name has failed the test. Name is not true of voice. He announces this to the court. Ammit, who has been waiting with barely restrained hunger, now springs into action. In a flash, she lunges forward, her crocodile jaws snapping shut around the guilty heart. She devours it in one gulp, her leonine body shaking with satisfaction as she swallows. Some depictions show her actually eating the entire person, body and soul, erasing them completely. The condemned soul, with no heart remaining, has no essence left. They undergo the second death, complete annihilation. The first death was the death of the body. The second death is the death of the soul itself. The person ceases to exist in any form. They will not join Osiris in the field of reeds. They will not become an Ach. They will not even exist as a suffering ghost. They are simply gone, as if they had never been. It is total oblivion, nothingness, the ultimate punishment. Some texts describe additional torments for those who fail, being cast into pits of fire, being beheaded, being bound upside down, being devoured by demons, having their names and images destroyed. The Book of Gates shows regions of punishment where the wicked are tortured, but the ultimate fate is non-existence. Osiris and the gods turn away from the condemned soul, offering no help, no second chance, no mercy. The judgment is final and irrevocable. Fortunately, in Egyptian belief, this fate was exceedingly rare, reserved only for those who completely rejected Ma'at, traitors, oath-breakers, temple robbers, those who killed their parents, truly wicked and unrepentant souls. The average person, having lived an ordinary life with the usual mix of small virtues and small failings, honored the gods, and was not a terrible criminal, could hope to be found acceptable. The system was designed to allow most people to pass, provided they had been properly buried with the correct spells and had made at least some effort to live decently. The emphasis was on proper preparation, knowledge of the spells, and general good intent, not on impossible moral perfection. 3. The heart is equal or close, deliberation needed. Some papyri hint at a third, less clear outcome. If the heart and feather are very close but not perfectly balanced, there might be deliberation among the gods about whether to accept or reject the deceased. Thoth and Osiris might discuss the case. The deceased's good deeds might be weighed against their bad deeds in a more nuanced evaluation. But this is rarely depicted. Most judgment scenes show a clear binary outcome, pass or fail, justified or condemned. Paradise, the field of reeds. For those who are justified and welcomed by Osiris, the reward is glorious, eternal life in a blissful realm called the Field of Reeds, Sechet Araru or Aaru. This paradise is described in the funerary texts and depicted in tomb paintings and on papyri with beautiful detail. Geography and appearance of the Field of Reeds. The Field of Reeds was envisioned as a perfected version of Egypt itself, specifically an idealized version of the Nile Delta, with its lush marshlands, fertile fields, and abundant water. The name Field of Reeds evokes the papyrus swamps where life flourished, where birds nested, where fish teemed, and where the air was cool and fresh. It was a landscape of endless marshes and farmland where the wheat grew taller than a person. In some depictions, the grain reaches 9 cubits high, about 15 feet. The fruit trees always hung heavy with dates, figs, and pomegranates, and the Nile's channels flowed pure, sweet, and clear. The Field of Reeds was usually described as being located in the east, where the sun rises, the direction of rebirth and renewal. It was a place of eternal springtime and harvest, where the climate was always perfect. The sun always shone softly, for it was the light of Ra in the sky of the Duat. Gentle breezes blew, carrying the scent of flowers and fresh water, and there was never drought, famine, disease, or pain. Some texts describe the Field of Reeds as being divided into sections or islands, each with specific characteristics. The Field of Offerings, Sekhet Hetep, where food offerings appeared magically, where the blessed could feast without labor. Various islands where different groups of the righteous dwelt. The domain of Osiris himself, where the king of the dead held court. Sacred lakes and waterways that connected the regions. The geography was crisscrossed with canals and waterways, reminiscent of Egypt's irrigation system, that the deceased could travel by boat. The blessed dead were given their own boats to paddle through these serene channels, gliding past fields of barley and emmer wheat, through groves of date palms, along banks covered with lotus and papyrus. Life in paradise. In this paradise, the deceased would have no more sorrow, pain, hunger, thirst, or fear, only the enjoyable work of tending fields, if they wished to, or the pleasure of endless leisure. They could live in an idealized version of their earthly life, but with all the hardships removed. Everything that made life in Egypt pleasant was present in the field of reeds, magnified and made perfect. The justified soul could engage in all the activities they enjoyed in life. Farming and gardening, but the work was easy and the harvest always abundant. Fishing and fowling in the marshes, with always a good catch. Boating on calm waters. Feasting on delicious food and drinking beer and wine. Wearing fine linen clothes and anointing themselves with oils and perfumes. Playing games like Sonnet, a popular board game. Listening to music and watching dancers. Socializing with loved ones. They could reunite with their loved ones who had passed on before, spouses, parents, children, friends, even beloved pets. Egyptian tombs often included prayers like, "May you see your father and your mother daily," or "May you join your ancestors in the West." The Field of Reeds wasn't a lonely place, but a community of the blessed, where family bonds continued eternally. Many tomb inscriptions and paintings show touching scenes of the deceased happily plowing or harvesting in the Field of Reeds, often accompanied by their wife or other family members who greet them. Husbands and wives who had been separated by death could live together again. One particularly moving scene from the Papyrus of Ani shows Ani and his wife Tutu walking together through fields of grain, hand in hand, enjoying paradise together. The blessed could also interact with the gods more directly than had been possible in life. They might attend festivals in honor of Osiris, Ra, or other deities. They could approach the gods with prayers and receive blessings. Some texts suggest the deceased could even join Ra's crew on his solar bark, traveling across the sky each day and helping to defend the sun god against Apophis. This would be the ultimate honor, to become one of the divine crew, the followers of Horus or the followers of Ra, who maintained cosmic order. The Ushapti, magical servants. Now, the Egyptians were practical people, even about paradise. They recognized that even in the afterlife, there might be work to be done. Osiris, as Lord of the Field of Reeds, might call upon the blessed dead to perform labor, tilling fields, digging canals, harvesting grain, as one would do in earthly Egypt. The Egyptians loved their homeland and wanted to recreate it in the afterlife, but they also wanted to enjoy leisure. The solution was the Ushapti, also called Shapti or Shawapti, depending on the period. These were small mummy-form figurines, usually made of faience, glazed ceramic, stone, wood, or pottery, inscribed with a specific spell, spell 6 of the Book of the Dead, that would animate them to perform labor on behalf of the deceased. The spell inscribed on Ushapti read, with variations, "O Ushapti, if Shabti is called upon to do any work which is to be done in the realm of the dead, to make the fields flourish, to irrigate the land, to transport sand from the east to the west, then you shall say, 'Here I am, I will do it.'" They would perform all the necessary tasks while the deceased rested in the shade of a persea tree, a sacred tree associated with eternal life, or enjoyed a feast. Wealthy individuals might be buried with hundreds of Ushapti, ideally 401, one for each day of the year, plus 36 overseer Ushapti to supervise the workers. Some tombs contained over 1,000 Ushapti. Each figurine was carefully made, painted, and inscribed. They were often depicted holding tiny tools, hoes, baskets, seed bags, ready for their agricultural duties. Some Ushapti were beautifully crafted, with detailed faces and wigs, while others were mass-produced and simple, but all served the same purpose, to ensure the deceased could enjoy leisure in paradise while the work got done. The presence of Ushapti in tombs underscores how real and concrete the afterlife was to the Egyptian mind. It wasn't an abstract spiritual state, but a continuation of life's patterns, farming, eating, working, resting, only without suffering. The afterlife was material and embodied, not disembodied or purely spiritual. That's why the body needed to be preserved, why grave goods were necessary, why detailed plans and tools were included. Paradise was an actual place with actual needs, albeit a perfected place. Freedom and transformation. Moreover, the Egyptian paradise was not static. The blessed were not confined to the field of reeds forever if they didn't wish to be. They had freedom, the freedom that came from being an Ach, a transfigured spirit with power. The deceased could assume any form they pleased, a power granted by certain spells in the Book of the Dead. Transformation spells allowed the Ba to become a golden falcon, soaring above the earth, a lotus flower, beautiful and pure, a phoenix or Bennu bird, associated with rebirth, a heron, sacred to the gods, a crocodile, surprisingly, a powerful and protective form, a ram, associated with Amun and creative power, or even various gods themselves, though this was more mystical union than literal transformation. These transformations gave the deceased freedom to travel, to experience different aspects of existence, to escape any sense of confinement. As one spell says, I shall assume any form I wish. I shall go forth and enter in. I shall stride freely through the field of reeds. I shall eat and drink with Ra daily. I shall be in his following, in his retinue. I shall ascend and descend. I shall neither die nor perish. Some texts speak of the deceased ascending to the heavens and dwelling among the stars. The circumpolar stars, those that never set below the horizon, including stars in the Big Dipper and Little Dipper constellations, were called the imperishable stars or indestructible stars. These were seen as the most ancient and blessed of the dead, including the gods themselves, who circled the celestial north eternally. A person who became one with these stars had achieved the highest form of immortality, never setting, never dying, always visible in the night sky. Royal pyramid texts especially emphasized this stellar destiny. The king's bones are iron, and his limbs are the imperishable stars. Others joined the solar bark and traveled with Ra, participating in the daily renewal of the cosmos. Still others preferred to remain in the field of reeds, content with their agrarian paradise. The pinnacle of achievement for an Ach was complete freedom, the ability to move between realms at will. An Ach could visit the land of the living, as a ghost or in dreams, offering comfort or warnings to their descendants, dwell in their tomb, enjoying offerings, travel through the Duat with Ra, live in the field of reeds, or ascend to the stars. They were no longer bound by physical limitations or by the single timeline of mortal life. This freedom was perhaps the ultimate reward, more precious even than eternal life itself. Part 5. Additional Deities and Myths. Egyptian mythology was vast, with hundreds of gods and goddesses worshipped across different regions and time periods. Beyond the major deities we've discussed, many others played important roles. Goddesses of protection and power. Hathor. One of the most important and complex goddesses, Hathor was primarily a goddess of love, beauty, music, dance, fertility, and joy. She was depicted either as a woman with cow horns and a sun disk on her head, or as a cow herself. Her name means House of Horus, Hathor, as she was sometimes seen as the mother of Horus. In other traditions, Isis filled this role. Hathor was also the Eye of Ra, his daughter sent to punish humanity, as we've seen. She could be both gentle and fierce, nurturing and destructive. In her gentle aspect, she welcomed the dead into the afterlife, offering them sustenance. She was the patron of miners who worked in harsh desert conditions and was especially venerated at Dendera, where her great temple still stands. Music and intoxication were sacred to her. Her festivals involved drinking, dancing, and celebration, joyous releases from the ordinary constraints of life. Sekhmet. The lioness-headed goddess, Sekhmet was the fierce aspect of Hathor, embodying the wrath of the sun. Her name means powerful one, and she was the goddess of war, plague, and healing. She who could send disease could also cure it. Sekhmet was invoked by warriors and was associated with protecting the pharaoh. She had a dual nature, destructive in her rage, but also a powerful healer. Priests of Sekhmet were often doctors, using both magic and practical medicine to cure illness. Bastet, Bast. Originally a fierce lioness goddess like Sekhmet, Bastet gradually became associated with the domestic cat and took on a gentler aspect. She was a goddess of protection, especially of homes and children, fertility, music, and joy. Her main cult center was at Bubastis in the Delta, where her festivals were among the most popular in Egypt, involving music, dancing, and celebration. Cats were sacred to Bastet, and killing one, even accidentally, was a serious crime. Thousands of mummified cats have been found in cemeteries dedicated to Bastet. Neith. One of the most ancient goddesses, Neith was a creator deity associated with weaving, war, and wisdom. Her symbols included 2 crossed arrows and a weaving shuttle. She was said to be self-created, emerging from none before the other gods, and in some myths she gave birth to Ra. Neith was especially revered at Sais in the Delta. She was a mother goddess, but also a warrior, capable of both creation and destruction. Her great wisdom made her the arbiter in disputes, as we saw in the Contendings of Horus and Set. Nut. The sky goddess whose arched body formed the heavens. Each evening she swallowed the sun, which traveled through her body during the night, and gave birth to it each dawn. She was the mother of Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and, in some versions, Horus the Elder. Nut was a protective goddess, often depicted on the inside of coffin lids, stretching her body over the deceased as she stretched over the earth, offering her divine protection. Prayers to Nut asked her to embrace the deceased and take them into her body, the sky, afterlife. Gods of wisdom and craft. Thoth. We've mentioned Thoth many times as the god of wisdom, writing, and magic. His roles were numerous. Inventor of hieroglyphs, measurer of time, he was associated with the moon, whose phases marked the passage of time, judge and mediator among gods, recorder of deeds, patron of scribes and scholars, master magician, and messenger of the gods. Thoth was credited with writing down all knowledge and was said to have authored numerous books of magic and wisdom. The Greeks later identified Thoth with their god Hermes, giving rise to the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth the Thrice Great, in Hellenistic mystical traditions. Ptah. The creator god of Memphis, patron of craftsmen, artists, and architects. Ptah was depicted as a mummiform man, holding a staff combining the Jed, Was, and Ankh symbols, stability, power, and life. He was married to the lioness goddess Sekhmet and was the father of Nefertum, a god of the lotus and perfume. Ptah was seen as the divine craftsman who created the world through thought and speech, and who gave humans the skills of art and building. Sishat. The female counterpart to Thoth, Sishat was the goddess of writing, libraries, record-keeping, and measurement. She was depicted as a woman wearing a 7-pointed star or rosette on her head, holding a palm rib for counting years and a pen. Sishat assisted the pharaoh in the stretching of the cord ceremony, laying out temple foundations, recorded the king's years of reign and his victories, and was patroness of libraries and scribes. She represented the practical application of writing and mathematics to administration and architecture. Khnum, the ram-headed creator god of Elephantine, who molded humans on his potter's wheel. He controlled the source of the Nile and was responsible for the annual inundation. Khnum was one of the oldest gods, and his creative role predated many other creation myths. He was often shown at his potter's wheel, forming a child's body, while another deity, like Heket, gave the breath of life. Nature and fertility gods. Hapi. Not to be confused with Hapi, son of Horus, this Hapi was the god of the Nile inundation, the annual flood that made Egypt fertile. Hapi was depicted as a pot-bellied man with pendulous breasts, showing his nurturing, fertility-giving nature, often with water plants on his head. He was neither clearly male nor female, but embodied the fertile abundance of the flood. Hail to thee, Hapi, who comes forth from the earth and brings sustenance to Egypt, began one hymn to him. Min, the ithyphallic god of fertility, procreation, and male sexuality. Min was depicted standing upright with an erect phallus and one arm raised. He was associated with the desert regions and with lettuce, which was considered an aphrodisiac. During harvest festivals, the pharaoh would honor Min to ensure continued fertility of the land. Min's overt sexual imagery, unusual in Egyptian art, which was generally modest, emphasized the creative, generative power necessary for life. Sobek, the crocodile god, worshipped particularly in the Fayum region and at Kom Ombo. Sobek represented the power of the Nile and its dangerous aspects. Crocodiles were both feared and revered. They could kill, but also represented the fertility of the riverbanks. Sobek was a protector deity, despite his fearsome appearance, and was associated with pharaonic power and military prowess. Sacred crocodiles were kept and mummified at his cult centers. Taweret, a hippopotamus goddess with features of hippopotamus, crocodile, and lion, who was patron of childbirth and protector of mothers and children. Despite her fearsome appearance, Taweret was benevolent and popular, especially in household religion. Amulets of Taweret were worn by pregnant women for protection, and her image appeared on deads and domestic items. She helped mothers through the dangerous process of childbirth and protected babies from harm. Bes, a dwarf god with leonine features, often depicted with his tongue sticking out, bow-legged, wearing a lion skin. Bes was a protector of households, children, mothers in childbirth, and people sleeping. He chased away nightmares and evil spirits. Unlike most Egyptian gods who were depicted in formal profile, Bes was shown face-on, confronting the viewer directly. He was associated with music, dance, and joy, and his grotesque appearance was believed to frighten away malevolent forces. Bes was one of the most popular gods in daily life, even if he had no major temples. Dangerous and ambiguous deities. Apophis, Epep, the great serpent of chaos we've discussed, enemy of Ra and Ma'at. Apophis was not truly a god, but rather the embodiment of Isfet, disorder, darkness, non-being. He was eternal and could never be permanently destroyed, only defeated temporarily each night. No temples worshipped Apophis. Instead, rituals were performed to bind and curse him. Set, Seth, the red god of storms, desert, chaos, and foreign lands. As we've seen, Set was complex. Sometimes villain, murderer of Osiris, sometimes hero, defender of Ra against Apophis, sometimes patron deity, especially of the Ramesside pharaohs. Set represented necessary chaos, the wild forces that existed beyond the ordered world of Egypt, dangerous but not entirely evil. He was associated with the color red, with donkeys, pigs, and certain dangerous animals. His cult centers were in the eastern delta and in Upper Egyptian sites like Umbos. In later periods, especially after foreign invasions, Set became increasingly demonized and equated with evil itself. Amit, the devourer of the dead, neither worshipped nor honored, but feared. She served a necessary function in cosmic justice, removing those who failed Ma'at's test. The solar deity and his forms. The sun god was perhaps the most important deity, but he appeared in many forms depending on the time of day and theological interpretation. Atum, the evening/setting sun, the aged creator who descends into the Duat. Atum means complete one or undifferentiated one. Ra, the sun at its zenith, midday, the blazing disk at full power. Ra represented sovereignty, kingship, and creative power. Khepri, the morning sun, the dawn, depicted as a scarab beetle pushing the sun disk. Khepri means he who comes into being, representing transformation and rebirth. Ra Hora Kakti, Ra Horus of the horizon, the sun as a falcon, especially at dawn or dusk, combining the solar deity with Horus. Amun-Ra, the merger of the hidden creative power, Amun, with the visible sun, Ra, creating a supreme deity that was both transcendent and immanent. Aten, the sun disk, physical manifestation of solar power, briefly elevated to supreme deity by Akhenaten. These weren't separate gods, but aspects of the same solar divinity, reflecting the Egyptian comfort with fluid identities and multiple names or forms for the same divine essence. Syncretism and local variations. Egyptian religion was remarkably fluid and syncretic. Gods could merge, take on each other's attributes, or be identified with each other in different contexts. Local deities in each nome might have their own creation myths and pantheons, often incorporating or equating their gods with the major national deities. For example, Sobek might be identified with Ra as Sobek-Ra. Horus had many forms: Horus the Elder, Horus the Younger, Horus son of Isis, Horus of Behet, Horus of Edfu, etc. Osiris merged with various local gods to become Osiris Khenti Amentu, Osiris foremost of the Westerners. Hathor could be equated with Isis, Nut, or other goddesses in different contexts. This theological flexibility allowed Egyptian religion to incorporate new gods without rejecting old ones, to adapt to changing political situations, like when Thebes became capital and Amun rose to prominence, and to allow different cult centers to each claim their god was supreme without necessarily conflicting with other centers. Part 6. Festivals, Rituals, and Daily Religion. While the grand myths provided the cosmic framework, Egyptian religion was also practiced daily through rituals, festivals, and personal piety. The temple and its rituals. Temples were the houses of the gods, where deities dwelt in their cult statues. The daily temple ritual, which we briefly described earlier, included dawn purification of the priest, opening the sanctuary, awakening the god, washing, clothing, and adorning the statue, presenting food and drink offerings, burning incense, reciting hymns and prayers, closing and sealing the sanctuary. This ritual, performed every day, maintained the relationship between the god and humanity. The offerings sustained the god, though gods consumed only the spiritual essence of the food. The physical food was later distributed to priests and temple workers. The king was theoretically the high priest of all gods, but in practice, appointed priests performed the rituals on his behalf. Only priests could enter the inner areas of temples. Common people could only access the outer courts. But during festivals, the god statue would be carried out in procession, allowing the people to see, though still concealed in a shrine on a portable bark, and celebrate their deity. Major festivals. Egyptian religion included numerous festivals throughout the year. Opet Festival, Thebes, a great celebration where Amun's statue was carried from Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple in a grand procession along the Nile. The festival celebrated the divine kingship and the renewal of the pharaoh's power. It lasted several weeks and included music, dancing, offerings, and public feasting. Beautiful Festival of the Valley, Thebes. Families would visit the tombs of their ancestors on the West Bank, spending the night in tomb chapels, feasting, and honoring the dead. It was a time when the living and dead could be together. Wepet Renpet, WIPRNP, Opening of the Year. The New Year festival, timed to the beginning of the inundation and the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, Sopdet, Sothis. It celebrated renewal and the return of abundance. Festival of Drunkenness, in honor of Hathor Sekhmet, commemorating the myth of Ra sending his eye to destroy humanity. Participants would drink heavily, celebrate with music and dance, and reenact Sekhmet's transformation back into gentle Hathor. Mysteries of Osiris, Abydos, a dramatic reenactment of Osiris's death and resurrection, with priests playing the roles of the gods. This was Egypt's closest equivalent to a mystery play, and pilgrims came from all over to witness it. Koyak Festival, a festival celebrating Osiris as god of vegetation, involving the creation of Osiris beds, molds in the shape of Osiris filled with soil and seeds, which would sprout, symbolizing resurrection. Personal religion and magic. Beyond official temple religion, Egyptians practiced personal piety and magic. Household gods. Families worshipped gods like Bes and Taweret in their homes, keeping small statues or amulets. These gods were accessible and concerned with daily life. Oracles. People would ask gods questions by approaching a statue during processions. The priests carrying the statue might move it in ways interpreted as divine answers. Votive offerings. Individuals left offerings at temples or sacred sites, asking for blessings, healing, or expressing gratitude. Thousands of votive stelae have been found. Magic, Heka. Magic was a legitimate and necessary force in the universe, created by the gods and available to humans who knew the proper spells. Medical papyri combined practical treatments with magical incantations. Amulets were worn for protection. Curses could be written on pottery and broken to harm enemies. Execration texts. Love spells, protective spells, healing spells, all were part of daily life. Letters to the dead. Egyptians would write letters to deceased relatives asking for help or complaining about problems. These letters would be placed in tombs or left at offering chapels, believing the dead could intervene on behalf of the living. Kingship and Religion. The pharaoh was not just a political leader, but a religious figure, the living Horus, son of Ra, mediator between gods and humans. The king's duties included maintaining Ma'at through just rule, building and maintaining temples, performing rituals, or deputizing priests to do so, leading military campaigns to defend Egypt. Maintaining the borders was a religious duty. ensuring the Nile's inundation through ritual and moral authority. The king's power was divine, bestowed by the gods at coronation. Royal ideology portrayed the pharaoh as semi-divine, able to communicate directly with gods, physically perfect, eternally victorious. The king was Egypt, and Egypt was the king. The nation's well-being depended on the pharaoh maintaining cosmic order. Epilogue: the eternal rhythm and legacy. From the creation of the world out of darkness, through the trials of gods on earth, to the judgment of souls in the Hall of Mot, we have traced the grand story that formed the spiritual heartbeat of ancient Egypt. This mythology was far more to the Egyptians than a set of fanciful tales. It was the very framework of the universe, the lens through which they understood nature and society. To live in Mot, in truth and balance, was to actively participate in this divine drama. Every sunrise was evidence that Ra had defeated Apophis once more. Every successful harvest was Osiris's blessing. Every judgment rendered fairly in this world echoed the final judgment that each soul would face in the next. The myths explained the origins of kingship, justified social structures, provided ethical guidelines, offered comfort about death, and gave meaning to both cosmic and personal events. The pharaohs of Egypt, in particular, cast themselves in the roles ordained by myth. Each king was an incarnation of Horus while alive and became an Osiris at death, attaining a divine status as an ancestor. From the Old Kingdom onward, the pharaoh's official titulary included a son of Ra name, explicitly linking the king to the creator sun god. Kings often depicted themselves in the company of the gods, suckling at Isis's breast as an infant Horus, or shaking hands with Ra to show that they ruled by divine right and maintained the cosmic order. Upon death, the royal funerary texts painted on tomb walls, in the Valley of the Kings for example, showed the deceased pharaoh merging with the sun, sailing with Ra in the solar bark, and being welcomed by Osiris to partake in eternal life among the divine. The well-being of Egypt was thus directly tied to the mythic narrative. So long as the king upheld Mot and honored the gods, the Nile would flood, the crops would grow, and Ra would continue to rise. Myth and reality were inseparably woven. For ordinary Egyptians, too, mythology provided comfort and guidance. A farmer tilling his fields could take heart that Osiris, who had taught mankind agriculture, watched over the growth of the grain. A mother mourning a lost child could find solace in the story of Isis and Horus, how a loving mother could protect and ultimately save her offspring. Families performed rituals for the deceased with full confidence that, just as Isis pieced Osiris together and revived him, so too would the funerary priests and Anubis help their loved one be reborn in the hereafter. At every Egyptian funeral, the opening of the mouth ceremony was enacted on the mummy, symbolically restoring the senses of the dead, a reenactment of what Isis and Anubis did for Osiris. Mythology gave these rituals their power and meaning. It transformed death from an ending into a transition, from loss into hope. The deceased weren't gone, but journeying, not lost, but finding their way to paradise with the help of the gods and the guidance of ancient spells. The cosmic framework also lent an ethical dimension to daily life. Egyptians knew that their heart would be weighed against Mot's feather, if not in this world's courts, then certainly in the next. This belief encouraged them to act justly, to be generous to those less fortunate. Charity was listed in the negative confession. I have not turned away a hungry man, I have not caused anyone to weep, and to refrain from lying, stealing, or violence. Their concept of morality was inextricably tied to cosmic order. Sin was that which made the heart heavy and offended Mot. Righteousness lightened the heart. The fact that all would face Osiris's tribunal instilled a sense of ultimate accountability. Yet it was a hopeful system. Nearly everyone could earn a place in the field of reeds. The tone of the Book of the Dead is largely confident, giving the deceased the tools to declare innocence and join the blessed. The emphasis was on proper preparation and intention, not predestination. With prayers, good works, and knowledge of the sacred texts, one could secure eternal life. The religion offered democratized salvation. Originally, only kings could be resurrected, but by the Middle Kingdom and later, any properly buried person with the right spells could achieve eternal life. This democratization reflects the Egyptian belief that human dignity and the possibility of immortality belonged to all, not just the elite. In the ever-turning cycle of Egyptian myth, the people found reassurance that every end was a new beginning. The death of Osiris led to the birth of Horus, the setting of the sun ensured its rising. Even the yearly drought, when the Nile shrank and fields dried, was not permanent. It was the mourning of Isis, whose tears, according to one poetic legend, caused the Nile to swell again in the inundation, bringing life back to the land. The appearance of the star Sirius, Sopdet Sothis, at dawn just before the flood was seen as Isis rising to announce the return of Osiris, the floodwaters, a celestial sign that the cycle of life was renewing. The Egyptians calculated their calendar around this astronomical event, the heliacal rising of Sirius, which coincided remarkably well with the beginning of the inundation. It was as if the heavens and the earth moved in harmony, all following the patterns established at creation. Thus, mythic thinking made the Egyptians optimistic that decay and disaster could be overcome by stability and renewal. Chaos could always be pushed back, Ma'at could always be restored. The legacy of Egyptian mythology. Egyptian mythology and religion influenced many later cultures and religions. When the Greeks and Romans encountered Egypt, they were fascinated by its ancient wisdom, often identifying Egyptian gods with their own, Amun with Zeus, Jupiter, Thoth with Hermes, Mercury, Hathor with Aphrodite, Venus. The cult of Isis spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, with temples to Isis built as far away as Britain. Isis became a universal mother goddess, her image of nursing Horus influencing later Christian Madonna and child imagery. The concept of judgment after death, with the heart weighed against moral standards, resonated with later religious traditions. While scholars debate the extent of direct influence, the idea of post-mortem judgment appears in various forms in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Egyptian emphasis on moral behavior determining afterlife destiny was revolutionary for its time and remains influential. Egyptian wisdom literature influenced later philosophical and religious texts. The instruction texts, advice literature for living well, share themes with biblical proverbs. The concept of Ma'at, living in truth, balance, and justice, is a sophisticated ethical system that continues to inspire. The physical remains of Egyptian religion, the pyramids, temples, tombs, and artifacts, have captivated humanity for millennia. When Napoleon's expedition brought Egyptian antiquities to European attention in the late 18th century, it sparked Egyptomania that continues today. Museums around the world display Egyptian mummies, sarcophagi, jewelry, and papyri, allowing modern people to connect with this ancient worldview. The decipherment of hieroglyphs by Jean-François Champollion in 1822, using the Rosetta Stone, unlocked the texts and allowed us to read Egyptian mythology and literature in their own words. The Book of the Dead, pyramid texts, temple inscriptions, and papyri tell us the stories as the Egyptians themselves understood them. This direct access to ancient thought is precious and rare. Conclusion: the eternal twilight. And so, as we conclude this long sojourn through the ancient imagination, picture for a moment the scene at an Egyptian twilight, as we did at the beginning, but now with fuller understanding. The sun sinks in hues of gold and rose, disappearing beyond the tamarisk-fringed horizon. We know now that this is Atum descending, the aged creator moving toward his nightly renewal. In the far west, in that rosy afterglow, we can imagine that Isis and Nephthys are standing guard as the coffin of Ra is received by Osiris in the depths of the Duat. The evening star twinkles, perhaps it is Isis's star, shedding a tear of evening dew for her lost beloved, a tear that will swell the Nile when the time is right. Families along the Nile light their oil lamps and say prayers to their household deities, small statues of Bes grimacing protectively in the corner, amulets of Tauret guarding the children's sleep. They trust that the sun will indeed return in the morning, that Khepni, the scarab, will push the solar disk up over the horizon, that Ma'at will hold for another day. In the distance, a priest of Amun-Ra climbs the temple tower to observe the stars, composing a hymn to the sun's journey, perhaps the ancient words, "Praise to you, Ra at your rising. Atum at your setting. You rise, you shine, O golden one, O disk, who makes the two lands bright. In the necropolis on the desert's edge, the tombs stand silent, each one a gateway between worlds. Inside, the painted scenes remain vibrant despite millennia, the deceased plowing in the field of reeds, the judgment of the heart, the gods in procession, the sun's voyage through night. The Ushavti figurines wait in patient rows, ready to serve when called. The mummies rest, wrapped in linen inscribed with spells, their hearts intact, their names preserved, their hope for eternity embedded in every ritual, every prayer, every offering. The hush of night falls. Ra is in the Duat, facing Apophis in the 7th hour. Osiris is judging the souls of those who died that day, weighing hearts against feathers. But everyone knows that in the holy east, beyond the mountains of sunrise, the scarab will soon push the sun toward dawn once more. The eternal rhythm continues, unbroken for millions of years, from the first sunrise at creation to the present moment to the infinite future. The tales we have recounted, of creation from chaos, of gods struggling and loving and dying and rising, of the soul's journey through death to judgment and paradise, served as a spiritual lullaby to the people of Egypt for over 3,000 years. They could lay their heads to rest each night, confident that the divine order was in place. Ma'at prevailed in heaven, earth, and Duat. And if Ma'at prevailed, all was as it should be. The Nile would flood, the crops would grow, the righteous would be vindicated, the heart would be found light, and the sun would rise. The ancient Egyptians built a civilization of unprecedented longevity, partly because their myths gave them confidence in continuity, in the triumphs of order over chaos, in the possibility of resurrection, and the fundamental goodness of the created world despite its challenges. Their gods were neither impossibly distant nor capricious, but accessible, understandable, worthy of devotion. Their afterlife was neither vague nor fearful, but concrete, achievable, and genuinely desirable. Their ethics were clear. Live in truth, speak truth, do justice, harm not, and your heart will be light. May these stories, in their calm and enduring wisdom, bring you also a sense of peace. Like a gentle current, let the eternal rhythm of Egyptian myth carry you into restful contemplation. In the words often inscribed in tombs, Ankh Wedja Seneb, may you have life, prosperity, and health. And as the ancients might add, may your heart be light as the feather of Ma'at. May your days be blessed by Ra's shining face. May you know the love of Isis and the protection of Horus. May Anubis guide you safely, may Thoth record your good deeds, and may Osiris welcome you with open arms when your time comes. May your name live forever, may your Ba fly free, may your Ka be sustained, and may you awake each morning renewed as the world itself was renewed at the first dawn of creation. As the scarab Khepri pushes the sun over the horizon once more, as the lotus opens its petals to greet the dawn, as the first birds sing their morning prayers, we too can participate in that eternal renewal. Each day is a new creation, each breath a gift of Shu, each heartbeat a reminder that we live, we love, we matter. The myths of Egypt teach us that death need not be the end, that order can prevail over chaos, that love, like Isis's love for Osiris, can conquer even death itself, and that truth and justice, Ma'at, are not abstract ideals but the very foundation of reality. Sleep now, as the ancient Egyptians slept, confident in the cosmic order. Dream of the field of reeds, of starlit waters, of golden temples, of gods and goddesses who care for humanity, of a heart light as a feather rising toward paradise. And when you wake, may you rise like Ra, renewed and ready to face the day, knowing that you are part of a story that began with the first sunrise and will continue long after the stars have faded. Neferti Amhotep, depart in peace. Di-Ankh, given life. Nefer Nefer, beautiful, beautiful. May it be so, forever and ever, as it was in the beginning, is now, and shall be, world without end. Amen. Or, as the Egyptians would say, Amen. Amen Ra, the hidden one, let it be so. The eternal Nile flows on, carrying the memories of millions of souls who believed, who hoped, who died and were judged, and found true a voice. Their voices echo still in the stones of temples, in the words of papyri, in the golden artifacts of tombs. They whisper to us across the millennia, "Remember us, speak our names, and we shall live. The gods are real. Ma'at endures. The sun rises, life wins." And so, dear reader, as the tale ends where it began, in the eternal twilight between day and night, between life and death, between the known and the mysterious, may you carry with you the wisdom of Egypt, that creation is ongoing, that love is stronger than death, that justice matters, that knowledge is power, and that even when darkness falls, dawn will surely come. Senebti, may you be healthy. Go in peace, and may the gods smile upon you.